It's the film that promised to be much, much more than a musical. And for once, that was truth in advertising. Hello, my name is Stephen C. Smith. I'm a film historian, an author and documentary producer, and a speaker whose lecture subjects include Charles Dickens, my favorite author. So I am thrilled to share with you a dramatic story loaded with, you should pardon the pun, twists, a story filled with fortunes lost and gained, of struggle and conflict, and a child whose secret family history holds wondrous surprises. And I'm only talking about what happened behind the scenes of this movie. Oliver the film took a character who had lived in the public imagination for over 100 years and put him at the center of what became 1968's Best Picture winner. A film that introduced exciting new talent to the screen while giving many of the world's top filmmakers a crowning achievement to their careers. But let's start by talking about the man who made it all possible. In just 58 years of life, Charles Dickens wrote over a dozen best-selling novels. He was a prolific writer of books, short stories, journalism. He edited magazines, he wrote stage plays, and sometimes he acted in those plays. He was also a tireless social activist. He put enormous passion into trying to improve the quality of life for Britain's poor, young and old. And he succeeded in a way that politicians couldn't by making those social causes part of his incredibly entertaining stories. He made readers from Queen Victoria to the poorest public worker shed tears over the cruelties inflicted on many of his characters and cheer their eventual triumphs. Why did he care so much about the poor? Well, because he had been one of them. Dickens was born into a struggling lower middle-class family in 1812, a family that moved often because Charles's father, John, couldn't hold a job, and what money he did earn could only pay a fraction of the debts he was running up. In 1824, 12-year-old Charles experienced a trauma that he never really recovered from. His father was arrested, and John and his wife and 4 of their 8 children were sent to live in London's most notorious debtor's prison, the Marshalsea. Young Charles avoided being incarcerated by taking various jobs in London, again at age 12. The most traumatic was at Warren's blacking warehouse, where he worked for 10 hours a day sticking labels on bottles. Decades later, Dickens told a friend that the warehouse's rotten floors and the old gray rats swarming down in the cellars, the sound of their squeaking and scuffling, and the dirt and decay of that place rise up visibly before me as if I were there again. For most children, there was no escape from a place like Warren's blacking warehouse where Dickens was working. But in the case of Dickens, a miracle happened. A relative died and left John Dickens enough money to get him and his family out of the Marshalsea and for Charles to go back and finish his education. At this point, let's pause and acknowledge the artist who created the wonderful illustrations you're about to see. You may think that these drawings were done in the 19th century, but no, they were made specially for the film by the artist Graham Barclay, and they set the stage beautifully for this story. Well, returning to the life of young Charles Dickens. After finishing school, his sharp intelligence helped him rise quickly from being a junior clerk in a law office to becoming, at age 17, a top court reporter in London. In 1836, at age 24, he completed his first novel, The Pickwick Papers. It followed the misadventures of a club of eccentric Englishmen, and it's still very funny. It was serialized, which means that it ran in a series of magazine issues before it was published as a book, and it was a huge success in Britain. By the time of its release, Charles Dickens was one of his country's rising stars, and he followed it with a very different novel, Oliver Twist. With this book, Dickens first shows himself to be a masterful, dramatic storyteller. He combines vivid characters, many of them larger than life, but relatable all the same, in a story that grabs readers right from the start, with its mix of action, suspense, comedy, tragedy, and ultimately triumph for the main character. It's very much a young man's book, written with passion and anger at the age of 25. This is not the Dickens we see in photographs, a thin-faced man with a long beard and a severe expression. When he wrote Oliver Twist, Dickens was beardless, he was young and handsome, and on the verge of becoming the Victorian equivalent of a rock star. Now, during his reporting days, Dickens had covered the British Parliament and its debates about the country's so-called poor law. According to his biographer, Claire Tomalin, most members of Parliament believed that the poor needed tough treatment, and if they could not support themselves, they should be forced into workhouses. Here they would be scantily fed and humiliated, and their families would be broken up. Well, the near starvation within these workhouses is, of course, a central idea in Oliver Twist. It gives the story its most famous sentence, "Please, sir, I want some more." In the character of Oliver, Dickens later said, "I wish to show the principle of good surviving through every adverse circumstance and triumphing at last." Of course, in doing so, he was able to draw on his own experiences as a child when he was virtually an orphan. Oliver Twist was serialized once a month in the magazine Bentley's Miscellany, which Dickens was also editing. It ran in the magazine from February 1837 to April 1839, so readers of the magazine had to wait more than 2 years to get the full story. But for those who couldn't wait, Oliver Twist was published complete as a book in 1838. Among its readers was Queen Victoria, who called it excessively interesting. It was also very popular among the criminal classes, and one London police commissioner reported that young thieves were often found reading it. Well, let's talk about this opening sequence. From the very first shot, director Carol Reed shows that he's going to honor Dickens' story by showing children working on what was called the treadwheel or the treadmill. This was a real device from Victorian times. Dickens mentions it in his fiction. The novel Oliver Twist begins before this point in the story with the arrival at the workhouse of Oliver's mother, who dies shortly after giving birth to him. That sequence was shot but cut from this film, probably because it's stronger to open with the children in the workhouse. They're about to sing the first song, Food, Glorious Food, and during it, I'd like to continue the story of how this film came about. We left off with the success of Dickens' novel. Well, even before Oliver Twist finished its serialized run in that magazine, it was already being dramatized on the London stage, without Charles Dickens' permission, by the way, since authors had no control over their books' copyrights back then. Oliver Twist became one of Dickens' most adapted books for the stage, and then, with the invention of movies in the late 19th century, it became one of the most filmed. There were numerous silent versions, including a 1922 feature starring Jackie Coogan, co-star of Charlie Chaplin's The Kid, playing Oliver. But the most influential film adaptation came in 1948 with David Lean's stark and powerful adaptation of Oliver Twist, starring John Howard Davies as Oliver and Alec Guinness as Fagin. Among the fans of that film was an 18-year-old would-be songwriter named Lionel Bart. The day he saw David Lean's film, Bart turned to the friend he was with and said, "One day, I'm going to write a musical based on that story, and it will be better than any American musical." Well, 12 years later, Lionel Bart did write the stage musical Oliver. Like Dickens and Oliver Twist, the life of Lionel Bart is a colorful tale of humble beginnings that turned to massive success. Bart was born Lionel Begleiter in 1930. His parents were Jewish refugees from Austria-Hungary. Lionel was the youngest of 7 children, and he grew up, in the words of theater historian John Tracy, amidst the bomb sites and squalor of post-war Stepney, East London. Well, even though Bart couldn't read or write music, he was constantly hearing melodies in his head, some of them inspired by Cockney street songs, some by England's music halls, some from Yiddish theaters and Jewish folk songs. Bart called himself an ordinary Cockney bloke who can whistle a tune. I hum it into a tape recording. Sometimes if I'm stuck, I tap it out with one finger on the piano. By the early 1950s, he had joined a theater club, acting, painting scenery, doing whatever was needed. He joined a skiffle band called the Cavemen, and by 1956, in the early days of rock and roll, his knack for writing catchy tunes was paying off. He wrote songs that became hit records, like the million-seller Living Doll for Cliff Richard. Lionel Bart's fierce ambition was paying off. He was still in his 20s and making lots of money in England. But like Oliver Twist, he wanted more. Specifically, he wanted to write hit stage musicals, and by 1959, he'd done it. First came the London hit Things Ain't What They Used to Be, followed by another success called Lock Up Your Daughters. But Bart hadn't forgotten about a musical based on Oliver. In 1958, he began writing the music, the lyrics, and the book, that is, the script of Oliver. And despite his past success, no one was interested. Bart said that more than 10 potential backers turned him down, calling the subject morbid. And you can see their point. Although Dickens' book is filled with humor, it's ultimately a dark story about neglected children, street criminals, prostitution, murder, not exactly the stuff of musical comedy. But Bart didn't lose faith in what he'd done, and we'll come back to his story shortly. But let's talk for a while about what we're seeing. Filling the screen is an actor who was beloved by British audiences for nearly half a century, Harry Seacombe. Seacombe was born in Wales in 1921, and he first found fame as a regular on the legendary BBC radio series The Goon Show, alongside Peter Sellers and Spike Milligan. That show's surreal humor was a big influence later in the creation of Monty Python's Flying Circus. Seacombe went on to act and sing in movies and stage productions, including another Dickens-inspired musical called Pickwick. And after completing Oliver, he starred in the first of what would be several popular TV series for him in Britain. But it was the role of Mr. Bumble that secured Harry Seacombe lasting fame around the world. Playing Mrs. Bumble is Peggy Mount, a well-known Shakespearean actress in Britain. And it's a testament to this movie's attention to detail that such a fine actress is cast in a role that, while very large in the book, does not have much screen time in Oliver, but she certainly makes the most of it. Well, we're about to hear the first words spoken by Oliver Twist, played by 8-year-old Mark Lester. So let's talk about his casting. Some 2,000 child actors were considered for the role of Oliver, and about 250 auditioned. Although he was just 8, Mark Lester had already studied at London's famous Royal Academy of Dramatic Arts, and he'd appeared in some major films like Francois Truffaut's version of Fahrenheit 451 and director Jack Clayton's acclaimed drama Our Mother's House. Mark Lester said about getting this part, "I kept being asked to go to these auditions, and eventually it got down to about 3 of us. We were at some big hotel in London. They sent us off to get our hair cut, and the barber in the hotel was told to cut our hair really badly. And he said, 'I can't cut hair badly.' And they said, 'Just do it like they were Victorian workhouse children.' So we came back with our hair all cut, and then we went home. Thanks a lot. About a week later, I was in the bath, and my mother came up and said, 'You've got the part of Oliver, and you start work on Monday.' I don't know why Carol Reed chose me as Oliver. I mean, I couldn't sing, I couldn't dance. I guess I must have just looked the part."
I'd be so curious as to ask his name.
Well, let's return to the story of Lionel Bart and how Oliver the Musical came to be. In 1959, after months of trying to convince someone that a stage musical based on Oliver Twist was a good idea, Bart convinced a producer named Donald Albury to raise the financing for a British production. And Albury was really the perfect producer for this because he liked projects that were daring enough to be different, but also had the potential for commercial success. It took nearly a year of rewrites to find the tone of this show. It was not easy balancing Dickens' dark novel with Lionel Bart's catchy songs and creating something that would appeal to the entire family. In 1960, the show had a tryout outside London in Wimbledon, and audience reception was cool. So by opening night in London's West End on June 30th, 1960, its makers feared that they had a flop on their hands. Lionel Bart was so nervous that just a few minutes into the first performance, quote, "Predicting disaster, I decided to leave and take a walk around London. I returned when I thought it might be over to be greeted by this tumult. Endless curtain calls later, the audience was refusing to leave. The rest has become history." Indeed, there were 23 curtain calls on opening night. Oliver ran in London for 2,618 performances. It would be the longest-running musical in London's West End until Jesus Christ Superstar broke that record years later. During its run in London, Oliver became the must-see show for everyone, from movie stars to British monarchy. During its 6-year run on stage, it was seen by the Queen Mother, Princess Margaret, Prince Philip, Princess Anne, and Queen Elizabeth herself. The London cast album climbed to number 4 on the charts, and its songs were covered in hit records by Shirley Bassey, Nancy Sinatra, Sammy Davis Jr., Dionne Warwick, Tony Bennett, and others. Well, during its run in London, some future stars were part of the cast and crew of Oliver. A young Phil Collins was a member of Fagin's gang, and one of the show's assistant managers was a young man named Cameron Mackintosh, who would go on to produce such blockbuster shows as Les Miserables and The Phantom of the Opera. In 1963, 3 years after it opened in London, Oliver the Musical bowed on Broadway, and although there had been skepticism about whether a show filled with Cockney accents and violence could possibly be an appealing musical, American audiences loved the show just as much as the British had. Variety called it one of the smasheroo hits of recent seasons, while the Daily News critic said it was one of the most impressive British products to be imported here since the Rolls-Royce. It ran on Broadway for 774 performances before going on a national tour of America. After that, it returned to Broadway for a while in 1966. By then, it had won 3 Tony Awards, including Best Original Score by Lionel Bart. Until Evita over a decade later, Oliver was the longest-running British musical on Broadway and the first British musical to be a big hit in America. Now, as Henry Seacombe sings Boy for Sale in his impressive tenor, I should mention that in the stage version of Oliver, Mr. Bumble has another song earlier in the show. It's called I Shall Scream, and it's a comedy courtship number sung between Mr. Bumble and the widow Corney, who becomes Mrs. Bumble after that scene. Very wisely for the movie, that song was cut, and the movie starts with the couple already married. This way, the story moves ahead more quickly, and the focus stays on Oliver. So how did Oliver the Stage Show become Oliver the Movie? Well, after its success in London and on Broadway, the show that no one originally wanted was now the musical that many producers were eager to film. In 1964, Sir John Wolfe and his brother James won a bidding war for the screen rights for their company Romulus Films. The Wolfe brothers specialized in prestige movie projects like Moulin Rouge, John Huston's biopic about Toulouse-Lautrec, and the Humphrey Bogart and Katharine Hepburn classic, The African Queen. Oliver was to be filmed in England, partly because tax breaks made it much less expensive to film there than in America. Even so, the budget was $5 million, which was a lot for the time, and eventually that cost rose to $10 million, all of it quite carefully spent. But now let's turn our eyes to the screen and pay our respects to Mr. Sowerberry, played by another fine character actor, Leonard Rossiter. Rossiter was born in Liverpool in 1926, and by the time of Oliver, he'd starred in stage productions at the Old Vic. He'd appeared in hit movies like Billy Liar, and he scowled his way through an early episode of TV's The Avengers. In the stage version of Oliver, Mr. Sowerberry has a song called That's Your Funeral. Lionel Bart wrote it after realizing what a great comedian he had in the actor playing Mr. Sowerberry in the original London stage cast. That actor was Barry Humphries, who later achieved worldwide celebrity as the drag figure Dame Edna. Again, cutting the Sowerberry's song from the movie made sense, because it really just slows down the story and takes us away from Oliver.
I'll look after him, missus. You see, my dear, it occurred to me that it'd make a delightful...
Sulking in the corner there is Noah Claypole, played by Kenneth Cranham. The Scottish-born actor would go on to appear in some 200 films and TV shows, including the HBO series Rome and movies like the Edgar Wright comedy Hot Fuzz. And while we stay for a while at the Sowerberrys, it's a good time to introduce the brilliant director who made all the elements in Oliver the Movie come together so perfectly. For a while, it looked like the director would be Lewis Gilbert, the British filmmaker who had just scored a hit with Alfie, starring Michael Caine. That's why Oliver's screenplay is credited to Vernon Harris. Harris frequently worked with Lewis Gilbert. And it was Gilbert who directed the screen test for Shani Wallis, who we'll see later playing Nancy. But ultimately, producer John Wolfe chose another director who could not have been more perfect. Sir Carol Reed gets my vote for the most successful director who is also the most underrated. By that I mean he made a lot of hit films. He made many award-winning films. But because he preferred to stay out of the spotlight and avoid publicity, Carol Reed is not a name widely known, which is a shame, because I hope that when this commentary is over, you will seek out his other movies. They include some of the most powerful and moving films ever made. Carol Reed was born in 1906 in a comfortable middle-class home in London. His father was an actor, more about him in a moment, and Reed himself did some theater acting in his teens. When sound film came in the early 1930s, Reed found work in the British film industry, and his attention to detail and sharp observation of people elevated him quickly to the rank of director. After several low-budget movies that allowed him to learn his craft, he worked his way up to A-budget pictures like the stylish thriller Night Train to Munich, starring Rex Harrison, and a film that became Carol Reed's first classic, The Stars Look Down, a beautiful, tragic drama about the dangerous life of coal miners. That movie showcased what would be a hallmark of Carol Reed's best work: sensitive performances by actors playing multi-dimensional characters. And he had a visual style that was strong without usually calling attention to itself. He made reality dramatic without making it seem false. During the war, Reed headed the British Army's film unit, making World War II dramas that included a movie about the planning of D-Day called The True Glory. And it's typical of Reed that when that documentary won an Oscar, he declined the award out of respect for all of his collaborators on the movie who were killed during its making in the war. Well, after World War II, Carol Reed directed what many critics feel are the best 3 back-to-back dramas ever made in Britain: Odd Man Out, starring James Mason, The Fallen Idol, starring Ralph Richardson, and the Oscar-winning thriller The Third Man, starring Joseph Cotten and Orson Welles. Well, partly because of this triple hitter of movie classics, Carol Reed became Sir Carol Reed in 1952. But the next 14 years of his career would be a time of struggle. There were financing problems for the films he wanted to make, and he worked with several difficult actors who took over his projects, invariably for the worse. By the early 1960s, Reed was considered a gun-for-hire director whose best days were probably behind him. In 1964, he had tried to buy the movie rights for Oliver, but as we know, those went to Sir John Wolfe. And here's the most amazing part of Carol Reed's story. One reason he wanted to film Oliver was because his father was a legendary stage actor, a superstar of his time, named Sir Herbert Beerbohm Tree. One of Sir Herbert's best-known stage roles was playing Fagin in Oliver Twist. And here's where things get amazing. Sir Herbert was the head of 2 households. One was with his wife Maud and their 3 children. His other, more private household was with a woman named Beatrice May Penny, with whom he had 6 children. Beatrice later changed her last name to Reed, and one of those sons she had with Sir Herbert was Carol Reed. So like the character of Oliver Twist, Carol Reed was the illegitimate son of a wealthy, important father. That fact was a secret to the general public, although people in the theater world knew about it. So there's no doubt Carol Reed felt a personal connection to the story of Oliver. And since his career had been on a slow decline for about 15 years, he needed the movie Oliver as much as Oliver needed him. Well, fortunately, Sir John Wolfe recognized that Reed would be the perfect director. Not only was he probably the best director of child actors in the business, but as his biographer, Nicholas Wapshott, wrote, Reed was a meticulous craftsman whose precision in preparation and love of detail would ensure that the massive cast and crew of at any time between 200 and 300 would be economically marshaled. Now, Carol Reed didn't play an instrument and he couldn't read music, but he often had a great instinct for music, and he had wanted to make a big movie musical for years. Once he started on Oliver, the old Carol Reed, the brilliant Carol Reed, was back. According to his biographer, Reed planned the exact logistics of the shooting schedule, perfecting the screenplay, and approving the sets, music, and dance sequences for 8 months before he moved the company into Shepperton Studios for an exceptionally long shooting schedule of 7 months, which, to minimize costs, would run continually, weekends included. He then set aside 6 months for post-production work and editing. So we're talking about a movie production of about 2 years. Pre-production began in 1966, filming began on June 26, 1967, and the movie was released in August of 1968. Carol Reed strongly felt that the author of a piece should be involved in a movie's filming if possible. Well, Charles Dickens was long gone. He passed on in 1870. But Carol Reed spoke often with Lionel Bart. They made notes during one of their first meetings, going over what was most crucial to emphasize in the story. And here are the 3 key points that they came up with. Number 1, Oliver is a character looking for love and a place to belong. For the first time, he feels a sense of belonging when he meets Fagin. Number 2, no one is kind to him until the time he meets the Artful Dodger and Fagin. And number 3, Oliver has no fun at all until he gets to London. These notes echo the ideas that Lionel Bart had used when he started writing Oliver for the stage back in the 1950s. Bart later said, "I read about Charles Dickens' life and how he had a hard time finding love. So when I started to write the musical, I began with that. The song, Where Is Love, became the musical center of the piece and the premise of the whole show." And of course, here is that song, Where Is Love, seemingly but not actually sung by Mark Lester. Now, Lester readily admitted that he could not sing, so his singing voice here and throughout the film is dubbed, not by another boy, but by Kathy Green, the 23-year-old daughter of the film's legendary musical director, John Green. As a songwriter in the 1920s and 30s, Green wrote melodies that are still sung today, like Body and Soul and I Cover the Waterfront. And as musical director at MGM during its heyday in the 1940s and 50s, Green oversaw classic musicals like Easter Parade and An American in Paris. He earned 14 Academy Award nominations in his career. He won 5, including Oscars for Easter Parade, An American in Paris, West Side Story, and yes, Oliver. Carol Reed worked closely with John Green. As the director later said, "I discovered that in a big musical, the man who directs it is far more dependent on other people than in a straight film. He has to learn from experts and consult with them all the time." Again, for Reed, it wasn't about his ego. The movie came first. Well, John Green spent 2 years in London working on Oliver. The music tracks for the songs and the singing were recorded before filming, with up to 110 musicians on the soundtrack. Then the actors would lip-sync to those recordings. And here we see a wonderful addition to the film that wasn't in the stage version. On the last note of Oliver's Where Is Love, fate seems to give Oliver the answer, because, voila, the window grate opens and he can escape. These shots are among the very, very few not filmed at Shepperton Studios. During its making, Oliver took over that enormous studio, which was just outside London in the county of Surrey. And as we follow Oliver here, I'd like to share some remarks that Carol Reed made about directing children, something he was famous for doing well. He said, "The trick is to try and start every scene with the youngster. That way, he or she gets their lines over first, and the adult actors in the scene relax, knowing that the youngster may not spoil the scene for them. Another trick is to do the child's scene over as many times as you need to, without pausing between takes. I just keep the camera running and gently tell the child that they're doing fine, but just try it one more time. It is very important, too, that the children do not get nervous. They must think of filming as fun. Therefore, you must never let them see you are worried or that tension is gathering. No, it's not easy directing children, but when it works out, it's a film director's most gratifying moment." Well, Mark Lester said about being directed in this, "It wasn't really hard at all. Carol Reed was brilliant in his method of directing children, and he made it a very fun experience. He had clowns, magicians to make us all laugh. It was very, very easy to work in those circumstances. He was very clever because he gave us what appeared to be very little direction. But of course, he was meticulous." Well, Oliver has arrived in London, so let's talk about the look of this movie. For the original stage production, designer Sean Kenny created a turntable set that was simple but ingenious. In the words of crew member Cameron McIntosh, the revolutionary stage design swept away all the cozy trappings of realistic theater. Every scene change was done in front of the audience, the set acting as a choreographer of the action, swiftly propelling the story to its dramatic conclusion. Well, of course, Oliver the movie needed a much more realistic approach than a turntable set, and the brilliant set design you see now is the work of four-time Oscar winner John Box. Prior to Oliver, Box had already designed the stunning looks for such films as Lawrence of Arabia and Dr. Zhivago. For Oliver, the 47-year-old Box found inspiration in artist Gustave Doré's famous 19th century engravings of London, with their mixture of bustling streets, smoke-billowing factories, and sinister alleyways. 350 crew members built these sets using 1,000 cobblestone slabs. There were even real loaves of bread in the baker's shop windows. Now notice that many of the movie's sets are shades of brown and black. According to the film's souvenir program, John Box wanted a mighty contrast between the lusty, fleshy color tones of opulent society with the more subdued hues in the life of its workhouse poor. These were reportedly the largest sets ever constructed in Britain up to that time. And now it's time to meet one of Dickens' most beloved characters, which is saying a lot, Jack Dawkins, a.k.a. the Artful Dodger. In the novel, Dickens describes the Dodger as snub-nosed, flat-browed, and common-faced, as dirty a juvenile as one would wish to see, but he had about him all the airs and manners of a man. Well, 15-year-old Jack Wilde, who plays the Dodger here, captures that character with incredible charisma. For audiences and critics, Wilde was one of the standouts in the cast, and it's easy to see why.
I'm an orphan. I've come to London to make my fortune.
Jack Wilde was born in 1952 to working-class parents in Lancashire in the north part of Britain. One of his earliest pals was a kid named Phil Collins. Yes, that Phil Collins. And Collins's mother was a theatrical agent who enrolled Jack and his brother Arthur in an acting school in London. In 1964, Jack and Arthur joined the cast of the London stage version of Oliver. Jack quickly realized the role he really wanted was the Artful Dodger, but he wasn't tall enough. Flash forward 2.5 years to January 1967. Since the makers of the movie Oliver were considering actors who had been in the stage productions, Jack got to audition. He would ultimately audition about 7 times, and on the last of those auditions, he found himself in the office of Sir John Wolfe and Sir Carol Reed. Jack was asked to perform the Artful Dodger's first scene, which we see here, alongside a boy who was in the running to play Oliver, and that boy was Mark Lester. After they did the scene, Carol Reed asked them to switch parts. Jack would be Oliver, and Mark would be the Dodger. Jack knew that he did not want to play Oliver, so he played Oliver for laughs as if he was not very bright, and that made Carol Reed laugh. Moments later, the director told Jack he was in the movie and he would play the Artful Dodger. Reed recalled that when he saw Wilde's audition, he was reminded of the young Mickey Rooney, that same confidence and charisma. And the connection you see here between Wilder and Lester was real. They stayed friends after this. As Mark Lester later said, he was very good to me. He kind of looked out for me.
Whatever we got, we share. If it's your chance to be, we should see some heart.
And now we've come to one of the movie's great showpieces, the song Consider Yourself. Asked how he came to write it, Lionel Bart once remarked, "I was in the street as a kid and I could reproduce all kinds of marching tunes that I had heard. I think that's how Consider Yourself started."
Someone to have no fuss. For after some consideration we can...
On the opening night of the stage musical Oliver in 1960, that London audience was fairly subdued until this song. Then, according to one member of the crew, during Consider Yourself, they just went mad. It was one of these things in the theater that happens once in a lifetime. It was extraordinary.
Family, we've taken to you. So strong.
Well, just as it did on stage, but even better, this number really energizes and opens up the film. And a lot of the credit goes to Oliver's choreographer, Anna White. White was born in Canada in 1922. Poor health as a child led her to take dance classes to build her strength. She not only got well, By her late teens, she had joined the San Francisco Ballet, and then she moved on to Broadway, dancing in hit shows like Guys and Dolls and Cole Porter's Silk Stockings. She was mentored by the great stage and screen choreographer Michael Kidd, and by the end of the 1950s, Anna White was one of Broadway's top choreographers. Her best-known stage credit is the original production of The Music Man, which, like Oliver, involved storytelling through dance and cleverly moving large groups of dancers across the stage. In the 1960s and 70s, she displayed equal skill in choreographing dance on film, a skill that reached its pinnacle with Oliver. This number, Consider Yourself, isn't just a song and dance. It moves the story forward. It shows London through Oliver's eyes, and it defines each group of characters we see with unique styles of dancing that reveal character, which makes us smile and laugh and ultimately gasp in amazement. On the set, Anna White could be a taskmaster, but she was a much-loved taskmaster. In Jack Wilde's autobiography, A Dodger's Life, the actor wrote, Anna White was absolutely adorable. She was a small, blonde, vibrant ball of energy. She got on so well with everybody, even us, and the bunch of kids that she had to contend with, it couldn't have been easy. Although she worked hard and long on this film, Anna White remembered her work on Oliver with great affection. At a 30th anniversary screening of the movie, she said, "It took me 1 year to do it. I had my children over there going to school, and the English were so wonderful to work for. They gave me a house, a chauffeur, a maid, everything I needed. My son used to cavort with Fagin's kids, and I used to have parties on the weekend. We'd have to hide the liquor and the cigarettes. They were wonderful kids, though. Jack Wilde helped me so much. Mark Lester had never done anything like this before. Jack had done the stage play, so he helped me. He'd take Mark's hand and pull him through the numbers." Well, watching this number, it's easy to see why Jack Wilde later said, "You could get lost at Shepperton Studios. The Oliver sets covered 6 sound stages and all of the vast backlot." But even with all that space, Consider Yourself is such an enormous number that a single street block was redressed up to 8 times, each with its own look, to get all the different locations for this number. In case you're wondering, Consider Yourself is just under 7 minutes long, and according to the movie's cinematographer, Oswald Morris, who we'll talk more about later, it took a full month to film just this number. And speaking of time, while the dance continues, let's talk about the production process for Oliver. Mark Lester remembered doing about 3 months of rehearsal at Shepperton Studios before any filming was done. As I'd mentioned, he and Jack Wilde formed a quick friendship. The only problem was that by the time of filming, Jack was fully grown, but 8-year-old Mark kept growing. So Jack had to have lifts added to his shoes to make sure the Artful Dodger stayed taller than Oliver.
Consider yourself one of the family. We've taken to you so strong. It's clear, going together. Consider yourself.
It didn't take Jack Wilde long to consider himself at home in the part of the Artful Dodger. He later wrote, "The role of Dodger always felt like a perfect fit. I felt that I knew him and his world. He was a child with the demeanor of a man, trying to beat the adults at their own game, and he didn't seem to be doing anything very different to what I was doing. I was working in a grown-up's world, being treated like an adult, and getting away with it." By the way, among the dancers in this final shot is a future star of the London stage. One of those urchins swinging her arms is Elaine Page, who a decade later would create the role of Evita in the Andrew Lloyd Webber Tim Rice musical. And from that show on, she became one of Britain's best-loved leading ladies in musical theater. I love the way this number ends with everyone just stopping and going back to their business as if it was a kind of fantasy in Oliver's mind. Well, courtesy of John Box's astonishing sets, we are about to enter a very different world. From bright sunshine, we're descending into the darkness of a criminal den, led by one of the most memorable and controversial characters in all of literature. I speak, of course, of Fagin. Before we meet him, I can tell you where his name came from. As I mentioned earlier, Charles Dickens was separated from his family at age 12 and forced to work in a factory sticking labels on bottles. Well, one of the boys inside that factory was named Bob Fagin. And even though, from what we know, Bob Fagin was kind to young Charles, Dickens the adult was so traumatized by that experience that when he needed a name for a character who keeps children trapped in a filthy space, he remembered and used the name of Fagin. In the book Oliver Twist, Dickens describes the gang leader Fagin as hideous, a loathsome reptile. He's often compared to the devil in the book. He is a smiling sociopath who pretends to care for his boys, but who is actually comfortable with their being killed if necessary. And in one of the worst decisions ever made by a great author, Dickens does not usually call Fagin by his name in the novel. Instead, over and over, he calls him the Jew. Well, Oliver the Musical did Dickens a tremendous service by reimagining Fagin in a way we'll be talking about. And the man that you are about to see, actor Ron Moody, deserves a lot of the credit. Before talking about Ron Moody, here's a little more background on Fagin the character. When the book Oliver Twist was first published in 1838, Dickens did get criticized for his depiction of Fagin. One reader called it an act of vile prejudice. Dickens claimed that he made Fagin Jewish because Fagin was a composite character of actual criminals who were Jewish that Dickens wrote about in his reporting days. He added, "I have no feelings towards the Jewish people, but a friendly one." Well, whether or not he realized it, Dickens was perpetuating a Jewish stereotype that had existed for centuries and was prevalent in British culture and, sadly, in many other countries. Although Dickens later created a sympathetic Jewish character in his novel Our Mutual Friend, his portrait of Fagin remains a troubling blot in the career of a writer who, it is worth repeating, devoted much of his adult life trying to help other human beings. Well, now let's talk about how Fagin was reimagined in this musical. As I mentioned, songwriter Lionel Bart was Jewish, and in a departure from Dickens, he envisioned a different kind of Fagin. As Oliver historian Mark Napolitano observed, Bart believed that his Fagin, quote, was a decent person in spite of his criminal lifestyle. And not only did the composer redeem the character, but he likewise reclaimed him for the Jewish people. Ron Moody, who we see here, was 36 years old when he created the role of Fagin in the original London stage version of Oliver. Moody was a Londoner, born in 1924. His original surname was Moodnick, and as the son of a Russian Jewish father and a Lithuanian Jewish mother, Moody liked to say, "I'm totally kosher." Before he said yes to playing Fagin on stage, Moody, in his words, wasn't keen to be in it because I didn't want to perpetuate what I considered an unfair, unpleasant image of Jewish people. He's a monster in the book, and I said I can't do it. When I was sent the script for Oliver, I saw that Lionel Bart was already halfway there. I realized a way to play Fagin was to forget Dickens and to create a clown, and I used every trick that I could think of to take Fagin away from Dickens' concept, and it seems to have worked. Well, it did work, and the Fagin, written by Lionel Bart and brought to life on stage by Ron Moody, was applauded and endorsed by many Jewish organizations. But when the screen version of Oliver began to take shape, Lionel Bart wanted someone else to play Fagin. For one thing, he and Ron Moody had had some disagreements about the role during the stage production. Bart's first choice for the movie was Peter Sellers, and Columbia Pictures, which would release Oliver, also wanted a proven movie star for the part. But Carol Reed had seen Ron Moody on the London stage, and both he and producer John Wolfe were convinced that Moody was the right choice for the film. Ultimately, they got their way, and they captured for all time what's been called one of the truly great character performances in the history of the stage musical. Like the song Consider Yourself, Ron Moody brings a fresh energy to this story, pushing the film forward and charming us along the way. And we're watching a perfect example of that now, one of Fagin's 2 show-stopping numbers, You've Got to Pick a Pocket or Two. Not long before the filming of Oliver, Moody had written and starred in a play about Joseph Grimaldi, a 19th century stage clown. Recalled Moody, I used Grimaldi's clownishness and influences from stories such as The Pied Piper to make Fagin a more engaging character. I've been collecting eccentric moves since I was a kid. Well, the result delighted audiences and critics. As Michael Friedland of the Jewish Chronicle wrote, some of the other Fagins gave great performances. Ron Moody gave from his heart. And here we must also acknowledge his director, Carol Reed, because although Reed could be very specific in what he wanted, he did so with a light and supportive touch. He made sure that an actor felt that his or her opinions were always being considered, and that's one reason his performers loved him. When asked about Reed, Ron Moody said, "It was the best direction I've ever had from anybody. Carol was a gentleman. He invited me to lunch before we started shooting and wanted to know how to do musicals, so he got from me my experience. He was a very kind man. I remember this incredible sensation all through the film that I was never touching the ground."
You've got to pick a pocket or two.
It wasn't hard for Mark Lester to laugh in this scene. Lester later said of his co-star, Ron Moody was great. He was very gentle, very supportive. He was easy to work with because he encouraged you. He was adaptive to the scenes that we were in.
All of them!
Well, while Fagin and his crew discussed the day's take, let's turn our attention to another important figure in the making of this movie, cinematographer Oswald Morris. It's tempting once again to use words like legendary or great for this director of photography, but instead I'll just name some of his credits: Moby Dick, The Guns of Navarone, Lolita, The Taming of the Shrew, starring Elizabeth Taylor and Richard Burton, and those are just some of the movies he made before Oliver. Oswald Morris was born in 1915, and by age 17 in 1932, he was working as a clapper boy, snapping a marker in front of the camera at Wembley Studios in Britain. By the mid-1930s, he'd worked his way up to being an assistant cameraman, working on small, forgettable films, but getting a lot of experience. Like most young men of the time, his career was interrupted by World War II. Morris served with distinction as a pilot in the RAF and earned the Distinguished Flying Cross in 1943. After the war, he resumed camera work, this time at one of Britain's most important studios, Pinewood, and the films he worked on got a lot better. In 1948, he was the camera operator on David Lean's famous movie version of Oliver Twist. Guy Green was the cinematographer that Morris worked under. And one would guess that having a hand on that film of Dickens' novel must have informed Morris's work on the movie we're watching. By the early 1950s, Oswald Morris was a distinguished director of photography in his own right. His willingness to take chances led to several memorable collaborations with John Huston on the aforementioned Moby Dick, the Toulouse-Lautrec biopic Moulin Rouge, and the Robert Mitchum-Deborah Kerr drama Heaven Knows Mr. Allison. By the time he began work on Oliver in 1967, Oswald Morris was among the most respected cinematographers in the world, but even he would be tested by this film. As he later explained, Oliver was the longest film I worked on. It was a monumental film. Musicals always take longer because of the sheer logistics. Oliver must have taken about 26 weeks to shoot. One thing that helped Morris during that long shoot was a technical innovation new to British films. One of his assistants, Joe Dunton, figured out how to place and run a video camera on top of the film camera. That way, after a take, the filmmakers didn't have to wait for their footage to be developed. They could watch the videotape instantly and get a good sense of how the take had gone. Well, this would be commonplace a few years later, but it was a radical breakthrough at the time, and it probably saved the production a small fortune. After Oliver, Oswald Morris went on to shoot many more important films. They included another Dickens musical, Scrooge, starring Albert Finney, the stylish mystery Sleuth, starring Laurence Olivier and Michael Caine, the James Bond epic The Man with the Golden Gun, and also the movie that finally won him a long-overdue Oscar, Fiddler on the Roof. Oswald Morris ended his career working with the Jim Henson Company as director of photography on The Great Muppet Caper and The Dark Crystal. Not a bad way to finish.
If you go on the way you started.
Now listen to this dialogue between Fagin and Oliver, because there's an interesting story about it.
Time. Sweet dreams, Oliver. Sweet dreams.
I mentioned earlier how much Ron Moody loved making this film, but during the first days of shooting, Moody worried that he might be, as he put it, given the chop, let go and replaced, since he was not a famous film star. Well, that changed after the filming of the dialogue you just heard. One day later, producer John Wolfe came to the set and, according to Ron Moody, he gave the actor a silent thumbs up. That's all I needed to know, Moody recalled. I knew I'd got the part after all that uncertainty, because they loved that scene. In the novel, Fagin says those words far less sincerely. He's trying to indoctrinate Oliver into his gang. But as Oliver historian Mark Napolitano observed, in the film, Moody's delivery is marked by his gentle inflection and compassionate sincerity, as though he foresees that there is something special in this child. A number of movie critics also singled out this moment. Joseph Gelmus, the reviewer for Newsday, would write, "The exact moment in Oliver at which I realized just how good a movie musical it was going to be was at the end of a long shot of Fagin watching his new recruit. Suddenly, like a revelation, Fagin's passive, thoughtful expression imperceptibly seemed to be the tender look of a man tucking his child into bed for the night, and the tone of the film was set in a poignant flash. Fagin was a father figure to this troop of little, lost beggars. Well, he may be a father figure, but clearly he's not a man to be trusted. And as we follow Fagin on this mysterious journey, let's talk about the two major characters we're about to meet. Bill Sikes, the murderous robber, and his ill-treated girlfriend, the prostitute Nancy. When Oliver the movie was announced, there was a lot of speculation in the press about who would play these two roles. Elizabeth Taylor was said to be a strong contender for the part of Nancy, with her then-husband Richard Burton a possible candidate to play Nancy's brutal lover, Bill. Well, Taylor and Burton had just made The Taming of the Shrew together for the same studio, Columbia. But ultimately, Sir John Wolfe and Sir Carol Reed made other choices, both of which I think were excellent ones in different ways.
Waiting for him.
Earlier, we heard Bill Sikes mentioned in the song "You've Got to Pick a Pocket or Two" and in the dialogue that followed. In the stage version of Oliver, we don't actually see Bill Sikes until Act 2, much later in the story. But the filmmakers made another smart choice by moving up Bill's appearance to the scene that you are about to see. And there's no doubt, once we see the shadow he casts, that Bill Sikes is not a man to be trifled with. Playing Sikes is 29-year-old London-born Oliver Reed. And in case you're wondering, yes, he was related to the director. Oliver was Sir Carol Reed's nephew. But nepotism was not a factor here. Years earlier, Carol Reed had tried to discourage his nephew from becoming an actor. He didn't succeed. And during the 1950s, Oliver Reed's good looks and his brooding, quietly intense presence brought him a series of good screen roles. Reportedly, it was John Wolfe who urged Carol Reed to cast his nephew in this film, and it was the right call. Oliver Reed was a rather wild spirit in real life, with a fondness for drink and for scaring people with his silent glare, so he was really born to play Bill Sikes. Now listen to the soundtrack, and you'll hear in the underscoring a song that the character of Bill Sikes sings in the stage version of Oliver. It's called My Name. Well, leaving that song out of the movie makes sense, because this Bill Sikes has no music in his soul, setting him further apart from the other characters. Using the song in the underscoring gives it a special purpose in the movie as an ominous reminder of how dangerous Bill Sikes can be. As for what Oliver Reed was like during the shoot, Jack Wilde would write in his autobiography, "As kids, we were all terrified of him because he was this giant of a man, and the only time we ever saw him was when he was in costume and made up for the part." Mark Lester seconded that opinion. Years later, he said, "We were all terrified of Oliver Reed. He was one of those method actors who got into the role completely. When he picked Fagin up by the scruff of his neck, Ron was nearly strangled. And in the scene when he had to drag me along the streets, he really flung me about." Well, he may have been a method actor, but he was incredibly charismatic. And that's why I think he's the best Bill Sikes ever put on film. In the novel Oliver Twist, Sikes is brutal and violent and pretty one-dimensional. You never really understand why Nancy is willing to give up her life for him. Well, Oliver Reed captures all the menace of Sikes, but also gives him a dangerous charisma. Even with very little dialogue, he turns a one-dimensional villain into an actual human being. And even when he was scaring people on set, he had that charisma. Jack Wilde later wrote, "He was everything I wanted to be, successful, strong, and good-looking, a bear of a man that women adored. And he drove fast cars." Well, speaking of women, it's time to meet the one major female character in the film, Nancy, played with life-affirming verve by Shani Wallis. Before we talk about the actress, let's talk about the character. Back when Charles Dickens was a reporter, he spent many nights wandering through the seediest parts of London, and he observed and knew many prostitutes. Dickens said he modeled Nancy after a real woman he had known. And after he became famous, he devoted a lot of energy in supporting charities that aided former prostitutes and helped them to find respectable work. In the book, Nancy, like Bill Sikes, is a more one-dimensional character. To our 21st century ears, her dialogue in the novel is often overwritten and like something out of a Victorian melodrama. She's always unhappy, she's expecting to die, and we don't really care about her until near the end of the story. That's very different in the musical Oliver. For one thing, Lionel Bart gives Nancy several wonderful songs, like the one we're hearing now, It's a Fine Life.
The prudes look down on us, let the wide world frown on us. It's a fine, fine life.
In the musical, Nancy is much more of a maternal figure to Fagin's boys. But even so, in the original stage version, as played by the actress Georgia Brown, Nancy was harder. She had more of an edge. Georgia Brown was among those who tested for the movie, but its makers wanted a different quality for this role, which was why they cast Shani Wallis, who was born in London in 1933. Wallis wasted no time in becoming a performer. She was tap dancing by age 4. In her teens, she studied at the Royal Academy of Dramatic Arts, and in her early 20s, she was appearing in British films like Charles Chaplin's penultimate movie, A King in New York. At the time Oliver was being cast, Shani Wallis was living in America, appearing in a Broadway musical called A Time for Singing, based on the novel How Green Was My Valley. To promote that show, she appeared on America's most popular variety series, The Ed Sullivan Show, and she sang the big ballad from A Time for Singing, which was called Let Me Love You. That night, according to Wallis, Mike Frankovich, who was head of Columbia Pictures, happened to have the TV on. He saw me and sent me a telegram. He said, "Hey, I have a role that's great for you." Soon she was auditioning for Sir John Wolfe, and auditioning. She made multiple trips from New York to London until she finally got the part. Incidentally, in the stage version of Oliver, this song is sung in Fagin's den, but in the film, it's moved to the pub called, as it is in the novel, The Three Cripples. Moving the song to this different location not only helps open up the movie, it also sets up a location that is going to be very crucial in the story's third act. When Shani Wallis was cast, there was a bit of concern among the production team about one thing. They knew she had a great voice and great radiance, but they worried that she might be too radiant, too clean and wholesome to play a downtrodden prostitute who is frequently beaten by her thug of a boyfriend. So, like the casting of Oliver Reed, choosing Shani Wallis was a strong move away from how this role had been played in the past. But of course, that warmth and life-loving quality that Shani Wallis has gives the movie another terrific burst of energy that keeps the movie exciting and fun. Notice how cleverly they've costumed her, by the way. What is the one color that we have barely seen in the movie so far? The color red. That's because the color red will be linked to Nancy. It grabs our eye, it matches her colorful personality, it hints at her livelihood, it reminds us that she is the heart of the story, and it also foreshadows what will happen to her. Again, Carol Reed made sure that this isn't just a song to fill time. It is advancing the story by telling and showing us the relationship between Bill and Nancy. As Shani Wallis said, the reason it was so good was because Carol Reed was so stubborn. He wouldn't allow the musical people to overshadow him. He'd never done a musical before, and they all said, no, you can't do that. But he stuck to his guns, and he believed in being true to the Dickens book and the way it depicted the social life of that period. He didn't want it to become a piece of fluff. Wallis had an amusing story about the filming of the end of this song. She recalled, "When I sing the last note of It's a Fine Life, Bill Sykes is supposed to walk away and his dog is supposed to follow. Well, I had to do that over and over again because the damn dog wouldn't follow him. I must have done it about 20 times. In the end, they had to put bits of bacon under the barrels so he'd walk away." Again, here we see how Ron Moody takes a Fagin scene that is straight out of Dickens and brings to it more humanity. Instead of the avaricious, greedy thief of the novel, we smile when we see Fagin taking such pride in the treasures he's collected. It reminds me of something Moody said about the role. He said he played Fagin not as a monster, but as a very naughty man. If you took the same man in our time, he would be somebody in business, doing what we call quite legitimate things, but being slightly crooked. Moody also pointed out that, yes, Fagin leads the boys into a life of crime, but in Moody's words, he's giving the children a chance they couldn't do otherwise, because most kids in those days were either down in the coal mines or up in the chimneys, living hellish lives. I talked earlier about how Carol Reed was renowned for getting great performances from his child actors. Well, we're coming up to a perfect example. Oliver is about to get a look at Fagin's treasure, and being a boy who's only known poverty, his expression should be one of amazement. Well, after several tries to get that reaction shot, Carol Reed wasn't satisfied with the result, so he quietly moved on. The next day, according to his biographer Nicholas Wapshot, Reed bought a white rabbit from a pet shop and hid it in his coat. The cameras were set up and Lester was placed in front of Fagin's box. Reed said, "Oh, Mark, I think I've got something that might rather amuse you," and brought the rabbit from inside his coat. Lester's face lit up and the shot was achieved.
Every detail you saw.
I'm sorry, sir. I'm sorry.
Do you see where I fetched the box from?
I don't think so, sir.
Be sure. Be sure.
Quite sure, sir.
Well, if you're sure, so I'm sure.
Here we do see some of Fagin's dark side, and again, Ron Moody walks a fine line here. He said that playing scenes like this, on stage you do things 10 times larger than life. On film, you've got to bring the size of it down, but keep the intensity up.
Did you see?
Not surprisingly, Ron Moody earned an Academy Award nomination as Best Actor for this performance. The winner that year was Cliff Robertson for the American drama Charlie. As for the work he did afterwards, Moody admitted decades later that the fantastic experience of making Oliver and the acclaim it received led him to turn down job offers that weren't as good. As he put it, I thought the people didn't come close to those I'd worked with in Oliver, which in retrospect was a mistake. Well, perhaps, but he did have other memorable projects. He's hilarious as the co-star of Mel Brooks's great 1970 comedy, The 12 Chairs. Moody was also a published novelist, he wrote stage plays, and he helped raise a great deal of money for theatrical charities. The actor returned to the role of Fagin several times, including a Broadway revival in 1986, in which Patti LuPone played Nancy. He enjoyed attending screenings of the movie, he stayed in touch with his fellow cast members, and overall he enjoyed what Nancy might have called a fine, fine life to the age of 91. He passed away in 2015.
Nancy! I'm coming! Bill?
Here's a short but very effective scene added for the movie, not found in Dickens or the stage musical. It lets us see Nancy and Sykes in a rare moment that almost resembles happiness and normality. It also hints that Sykes does care about Nancy, but has no idea how to express it. Oliver Reed didn't speak seriously about his craft very often, but on one occasion he did talk about how he approached playing Sykes, and this is what he said. The problem became, how do you play a 19th century thug? I play him in a contemporary way, to relate the violence in him to the violence people understand from their own lives. So what did Reed mean by the violence people understand from their own lives? Perhaps the notion that people who abuse were often abused themselves, or that violence can come from the inability to communicate? Whatever interpretation you give his remarks, it shows that he was a thinking actor.
Appetite.
Jack Wilde, in his autobiography, shared an example of how Carol Reed brought as much reality as possible to the story and how he motivated his young actors. Wilde wrote, "When we first started filming in Fagin's den, we were given a designated place in the alcoves on the set for our character to sleep in. Once it was decided who slept where, it was accepted that you would stay in your little space, and when we were hanging around for the next shot to be set up, we would often go and wait on our character's bed." Wilde also got a key piece of direction from Carol Reed about this scene. The director said, "You see, Jack, I think Dodger's a little bit in love with Nancy. In the book, she's not that much older than him, so I think you'd be protective towards her. But be careful, because Sykes could kill you with one blow." That's also an example of how Carol Reed never talked down to an actor, even if he was 15 years old. According to Jack Wilde, Reed always spoke with a quiet authority and made the direction so easy to understand. He'd walk calmly over, as though he had all the time in the world, and his pieces of direction felt like a quietly delivered gift. Writing about this song, theater historian Ken Bloom observed, "The I'd Do Anything number tells a story, defines character, and has a beginning, middle, and end. It's a brilliant piece of choreography without calling attention to just how smart it is." Like the other leads, Shani Wallace worked for several months before filming with choreographer Anna White and her main assistant, Tommy Pankow, and they made it a very collaborative experience. As Wallace recalled, when they were working with me and making me exercise for the dancing, it wasn't just me. They did everything that they wanted me to do. We'd all do it together.
Anywhere for your smile, everywhere I'd see.
In the original London stage production of Oliver, there was relatively little dancing. There was a lot of choreographed movement of actors across the stage, but not real dancing. So this is another way that Oliver the movie changed and improved on the stage version. And ever since the film, audiences who see the show live expect to see dancing that at least evokes what they remember from the movie. Well, even though the Artful Dodger may have a crush on Nancy, the film also uses this song, "I'd Do Anything," to start building a relationship between Nancy and Oliver. That's another example of Carol Reed's sense of drama, because by the end of the story, we know that Nancy would do anything, including giving her own life for Oliver's safety.
To me, I know
I'd go anywhere for your smile. Anywhere for your smile. Everywhere I'd see.
Would you lace my shoe?
Anything. Paint your face bright blue. Anything.
Catch a kangaroo?
Anything.
Go to Timbuktu?
And back again. I'd risk everything for one kiss. Everything. Yes, I'd do anything.
Anything?
The actress playing Bet, Sheila White, had a perfect face for period films, and indeed a good portion of her career after this was spent playing characters from the past. She appeared in the 1970s TV series Poldark and may be best remembered for playing the beautiful, scheming Messalina in the acclaimed miniseries I, Claudius, opposite Derek Jacobi. A reminder that Oliver began filming in June of 1967. It was a very hot summer, and this number was reportedly shot during one of the hottest weeks, with many, many takes for the various angles. But you would never know it watching the delicacy and mock daintiness of the performers.
I know that I'd do anything for you, dear. Anything for you mean everything to me.
I should also single out someone who is rarely mentioned when Oliver is being praised, although he did receive an Oscar nomination, and that is the editor, Ralph Kemplin. His work is subtle, but very effective, and I love the choices that he made in this scene. Kemplin edited many films produced by Sir John Wolfe, including The African Queen, not to mention a terrific suspense film, 1973's The Day of the Jackal.
I'd do anything for you, dear. Anything, yes, I'll.
In a moment, Ron Moody will be getting into the act with an inspired bit of improvisation.
Would you rob a shop?
Anything,
Would you risk the drop?
anything.
Though your eyes go.
Moody later said of this scene, "I loved working with all the boys. I enjoyed their mischievous minds, and I'd always try to surprise them on camera to keep them alert. I remember sticking my quill in my hair to make them laugh during the filming."
Anything,
Anything!
anything for you.
We'll get to work then. No argument, man. There's fine pickings in the street. Get out and earn your keep.
You promised we could go and see the hanging.
Be sure it ain't your own.
Fagin, I'm waiting.
Waiting, my dear? What for?
I love how carefully music is used in this film. There is actually very little underscoring between the songs because those scenes don't need music.
If it's all the same to you.
Since we'll be spending a few minutes here in Fagin's lair, let's talk about where Dickens placed this den of criminality. In the novel Oliver Twist, we're told that it's located in Field Lane in London. That's an area Charles Dickens knew well. It was, as his biographer Claire Tomalin wrote, filled with squalid alleys and ditches. At the time he wrote Oliver Twist, Dickens and his family lived in a small but attractive home in London on Doughty Street. It's now the wonderful Dickens Museum, which I encourage you to visit. This home of Dickens was just a few minutes' walk from the alleys and ditches of Field Lane, where Fagin would live, and anyone who traveled around Field Lane in the 19th century was unlikely to forget the filth and odors of a place that, to put it politely, had none of the plumbing or hygiene of a modern home. I think that Oliver the movie suggests this feeling of squalor without rubbing our nose in it.
Would you, my dear? Well, why not? You've got to start.
As early as Oliver Twist's first publication, critics praised Dickens for capturing the language of the street with such accuracy. Again, his sharp skills of observation and his years of reporting made him careful in getting the details of neighborhoods and characters right. And speaking of getting characters right, there's a recording I've heard taken on set of this film in which one of Carol Reed and Anna White's assistants is giving direction to the child actors. He tells them, "Before you go home for the weekend, I want you to think about who you are in the play, what you are, why you've become pickpockets, how you came to meet Fagin, so that you are different people. different characters when you come in. And here we have another catchy march tune, courtesy of Lionel Bart and embellished by Anna White with a little help from Ron Moody. Remember that Moody said that one of the ways he changed Fagin to make him less monstrous was to make him more like a Pied Piper, which we see quite literally here. In his autobiography, Jack Wilde said of Moody, "He was just so inventive, and we were transfixed by his presence. Charisma flowed out of him. He seemed to be so tall out of costume and so bent in costume. And as soon as Carol Reed would say cut, he would be back to his normal self. We all respected him, partly because he treated us not so much as kids, but as fellow actors, and we did our best to respond in kind."
Full of cash, don't want to see any trash.
Another thing that gives the movie so much energy are the musical arrangements, which are very full, and the music director, John Green, adds all of these catchy counter melodies to a tune the way he's doing here. So when there's a musical number, it has the same sense of activity and movement that the screen does, or a page of a Charles Dickens novel does. John Green won a well-deserved Academy Award for this film. It would be his 5th. I had the privilege of interviewing him in 1984, 5 years before he passed away, and it amazed me that Green, who had written so many songs that became standards, who worked on movies like West Side Story and Oliver, that he was filled with regret over his career. He said he wished that he had done more of his own original composing during his 40 or so years in the business. Well, he certainly wrote many great songs, but I have to admit, I'm glad he did what he did, because as films like this one show, John Green was a genius when it came to bringing out the best in other people's music.
Cheerio, but be back soon. I don't know, son, now I miss you. I love you, that's why I say cheerio, but goodbye.
The end of this number gives us another chance to enjoy the production design of John Box with its unique blend of fantasy and grit. Box was also an Oscar winner for this film. He had already won 3, but perhaps the ultimate accolade he got came from Lionel Bart. Bart had loved the non-realistic set of the original stage production, a set that was a revolving turntable. That stage was quite bare, and the world of Dickens was more suggested through the actors and movement on stage than by the set. Well, of course, what John Box had to do for the film was the opposite of that stage production. But nevertheless, Lionel Bart told Box that his sets for the movie were one of the 2 most rewarding aspects of the film for him. I'll tell you what the other one is later. After Oliver, John Box continued to work with an eclectic group of directors. He teamed with William Friedkin on 1977's Sorcerer. He worked with Michael Mann on the supernatural drama The Keep. And he re-teamed with David Lean, his partner on Lawrence of Arabia and Dr. Zhivago, to design the sets for Lean's final film, A Passage to India. Box's work on Oliver was so detailed that cast members like Harry Seacombe and Ron Moody loved to wander through them during breaks. Moody later said, "That summer of 1967 was one of the happiest times of my life. At lunchtime, you'd see crowds of Victorians, all in costume, eating their sandwiches on the streets of 19th century London." Watching this scene, the robbery of Mr. Brownlow, reminds me how much Charles Dickens would have loved movies. He died in 1870, 25 years before moving pictures were first exhibited. I have no doubt he would have been one of the top-paid screenwriters in the business. And in a way, Dickens was a screenwriter, because there are many adaptations of his work that use his dialogue and descriptions almost exclusively. Here's how Dickens describes the scene we're watching now in his novel. After Mr. Brownlow's handkerchief is taken, Oliver stood for a moment so tingling through all his veins from terror that he felt as if he were in a burning fire. Then, confused and frightened, he took to his heels and made off as fast as he could lay his feet to the ground. Seeing the boy scudding away at such a rapid pace, the old gentleman shouted, "Stop thief!" with all his might. "Stop thief! Stop thief! There is a magic in the sound." The tradesman leaves his counter, the butcher throws down his tray, the baker his basket. Away they run, helter-skelter, yelling, screaming, knocking down the passengers as they turn the corners, rousing up the dogs, and streets, squares, and courts re-echo with the sound. Stop thief, stop thief. The cry is taken up by 100 voices, and the crowd accumulate at every turning. Away they fly, splashing through the mud and rattling along the pavements. Up go the windows, outrun the people. Onward bear the mob, and joining the rushing throng, lend fresh vigor to the cry, "Stop thief! Stop thief!" One wretched, breathless child, panting with exhaustion, terror in the looks, large drops of perspiration streaming down his face, strains every nerve to make his head upon his pursuers, and as they follow on in his track and gain upon him every instant, they whoop and scream with joy. Well, to that vivid description, the filmmakers add two clever bits of action. The first we saw earlier when Oliver was briefly hidden inside a slab of meat, and here, Oliver's capture is cleverly reimagined for the movie using that bright train we see from time to time. It's worth mentioning that trains and the ability to travel from city to city was new at the time that Dickens was writing. It's one of the many changes brought about by the Industrial Revolution of the 19th century, and trains figure a great deal in Dickens' fiction. So it was perfect to add a train to this sequence. It underscores just how powerful the forces are working against Oliver, a small, helpless, poor street child.
You see, you're blowed upon. And I'm afraid, you see, that if the game was up with us...
Here we see the first scene in which Bill Sikes and Fagin have a real dialogue, one that is mostly quiet but fraught with tension. Again, there's no underscoring. This is serious drama we're watching, the kind of scene Carol Reed excelled in directing, as he had shown in earlier crime thrillers like Odd Man Out and The Third Man. Oliver Reed and Ron Moody are terrific here. And it's worth mentioning that while many in the cast were frightened or intimidated by Oliver Reed and kept their distance from him, Ron Moody had a different take on his co-star. He later said that Oliver Reed was a tease. People didn't realize that behind those baleful eyes was a child who liked to tease. He enjoyed fixing his terrifying gaze on people until they cracked. He was a professional drunk, but although he was often in his cups, he never showed it and was always punctual and prepared.
I believe you, Bill. Have another drink.
Silence. Silence.
This courtroom scene was not in the stage version of Oliver, although it is a memorable scene in Dickens' novel. And it's a credit to Carol Reed's attention to detail that he cast an Oscar-winning actor, Hugh Griffith, in the small but gem-like role of the drink-loving judge. In Dickens' novel, this character is named Mr. Fang, and according to Dickens, he was based on a real-life judge whose hearings Dickens covered as a court reporter. So even when the author exaggerated for entertaining comic effect, he invariably rooted the things he wrote about in reality. Indeed, the whole book of Oliver Twist, especially its first half, is a balancing act of describing terrible situations, including the abuse of children, but doing it in a comic, ironic tone that allows us to hear about the terrible lives of the poor in Victorian London while keeping us hooked with the flair and the wit of Dickens' writing style.
Well, what's the child with?
Before he leaves us, we should talk a bit about the actor playing the judge, Hugh Griffith. In 1960, Griffith won a Best Supporting Actor Oscar for his supporting role in the 1959 Best Picture winner, Ben-Hur, in which he played the shrewd and sympathetic owner of those horses that allowed Charlton Heston to win the chariot race. Hugh Griffith excelled at playing rapscallions on both sides of the law. I highly recommend his hilarious performance in 1963's Best Picture winner, Tom Jones. Griffith was famous for stealing every scene he was in, and in Oliver, that wasn't hard to do. Carol Reed gives Griffith every chance to squeeze the last drop of comedy out of this character. No wonder Reed was often called the actor's director.
A liar as well as a thief, eh?
And insolent into the bargain. Well, that settles it. The boy committed...
The dialogue is close to Dickens' original, and it reflects how much contempt Dickens had for Britain's legal system. In fact, he wrote an entire novel, one of his best, Bleak House, all about a lawsuit that lasts for generations until a giant fortune evaporates, all of it gone to pay courtroom and legal fees.
Hasn't it?
Like Oliver the stage musical, Oliver the movie has an intermission that we're about to come to. This was quite common in American films in 1968, especially for the many musicals Hollywood was making at this time. 3 years earlier, in 1965, The Sound of Music had become a surprise box office smash, the most successful movie ever released up to that time. Well, Hollywood was never a place to ignore what might be a trend. So after The Sound of Music, studios began producing a lot of big-budget, 3-hour movie musicals, which had special engagements in big theaters before those films played in smaller cities on smaller screens. Unfortunately, there were more failures than hits among the blockbuster movie musicals made after The Sound of Music, and the studios eventually realized that audiences didn't necessarily want to see epic musicals. Instead, they wanted to see musicals with great songs, great stories, and great characters. The film of Oliver was already in the works before The Sound of Music reached movie screens, so it really wasn't part of that trend, but the movie's success helped show that audiences did want to see musicals as long as they were good ones. I'm very glad that this disc includes the music that theater audiences heard in 1968 when this movie opened, the music that we heard before the main titles and the music that you're about to hear, because the arrangements of John Green and his team get a wonderful showcase in these sections. And take a moment to notice what songs are featured in this music that welcomed moviegoers back into their seats from intermission. This so-called entr'acte focuses mostly on the song Where Is Love? It's a reminder of what Lionel Bart considered the idea at the heart of his musical version of Oliver Twist, the need that we all have to be loved and how difficult that sometimes can be to find. Bart once said that all of the characters in Oliver are looking for love of some kind, something that isn't true in the novel but is more or less the case in the musical. That is, if you accept that somewhere deep down inside Bill Sikes wants to be loved, and that Mr. and Mrs. Bumble love anything besides power and money and control. But certainly Oliver, Nancy, Mr. Brownlow, and yes, even Fagin and his gang, all are seeking love or approval of some kind. So let's listen to the end of this beautiful instrumental, and I'll join you again when the story of Oliver resumes. It's a little unusual to start the second part of a big movie musical with such an intimate shot as this one. But again, it reflects how Carol Reed wasn't thinking about being big and splashy. He was totally focused on telling the story of how one abandoned little boy finds love and a family. And it also gives us a subtle way to start what will become the movie's second epic production number, the song Who Will Buy? It's brilliant how this number starts quietly with bird sounds and a single street singer whose voice brings Oliver to the window. And then choreographer Anna White and her team bring in just a few more women and men selling their wares, and then a few more, and then a few more. And it continues to build until we are ultimately feeling the rush of excitement of all the activity on screen in what has become another extraordinary example of storytelling in dance. I remember during my first trip to London going on a tour bus and being taken to Bloomsbury Square, where I was told this sequence in Oliver was filmed. Well, over 3 decades later, I am still waiting for my refund for that tour, because this entire sequence, like almost everything in the movie, was filmed at Shepperton Studios in a massive recreation of London's Bloomsbury Square. This song and the dance that follows are 8.5 minutes long. And by the time it's over, you will see nearly 300 dancers, that was Anna White's count, making it one of the biggest movie musical numbers ever staged. It took many weeks to rehearse and about 1 month to shoot. And prior to that filming, all of the singing and the musical accompaniment was pre-recorded under the conducting baton of John Green, leading 110 musicians. I've remarked on how loved Anna White was by the cast and crew, but there was one person who was not completely sold about bringing her onto the project at first, and that was Oliver's songwriter and creator, Lionel Bart. According to Anna White, Lionel Bart wasn't sure that I should do the movie because I wasn't English. I was Canadian, but that wasn't close enough, so I had to prove to him that I could do it. In interviews she gave near the end of her life, Anna White recalled that the number she staged to sell her skills to Lionel Bart was this one, Who Will Buy? Perhaps she meant she had to lay it out for him on paper to convince him or talk him through it, because according to Anna White's daughter, Jean, who remembered the filming of Oliver vividly, Who Will Buy was shot weeks after Consider Yourself, and by then, Anna White was one of the most important members of the team. Whatever the case, White would receive a special, non-competitive Academy Award for Oliver honoring outstanding choreography achievement. She certainly deserved it, but according to her, music director John Green helped pull some strings to make that happen.
At my leisure, whenever things go wrong, and I will keep.
Here's a piece of movie trickery. Mark Lester seems to be on the balcony of Oliver's bedroom, but in those close-ups, as he later revealed, I'm actually on top of a crane looking out behind the window, which looks like it's a real window.
Who will buy this wonderful feeling? I'm so high, I swear I could fly.
Life's a grind.
Me, oh my, I don't want.
Now, remember these flying birds during the story I'm about to tell you. Director Carol Reed knew that the best thing he could do during the creation of this number was to let Anna White conceive the dance, then discuss it with her, plan the camera angles, and then stand back and supervise. His approach was greatly appreciated by Anna White. She later said, Sir Carol Reed, God rest his soul, was heaven to work with. On Who Will Buy, he was on the set all the time, looking and looking and looking. And he said, Gee, Anna, is there anything I can do to help you? And I said, Yeah, Carol, I'd like some birds flying at one point. He said, I'll do that. And he let the birds go. That was his contribution to the number. He was a darling. I love how during this section of the number, the tempo of the song now quickens. And again, the movie gets a jolt of fresh energy that's going to create a sense of exhilaration. And by showing Oliver watching it all from the window, we can interpret this, if we want to, as the heightened reality that he's feeling. This is the first time in the movie, 94 minutes in, that Oliver is actually safe, and he is loving it. Notice how the camera starts low, then glides to the right as it pushes in, making us feel like these dancers are going to land in our laps. And then just when we couldn't get any closer, we cut to this overhead shot, giving us a sense of the scope and the scale of this number. This is exactly what Charles Dickens did on the page. He made us feel the heartbeats of his main characters, his heroes, and his villains, while also painting a sprawling, big-picture canvas of the world they inhabit, usually London. And in the movie Oliver, direction, camera work, choreography, and music give us the cinematic equivalent of what Dickens did in print. And now I'll share a bit of behind the scenes. Well, it isn't gossip because all the parties involved have discussed it. One of those milkmaids is a classically trained dancer named Jackie Darrell. She and Oliver Reed had a romance during production, resulting in a daughter, and also the end of Mr. Reed's marriage in 1969. Understandably, Anna White was not pleased to have that kind of thing happen to one of her dancers, as she told audiences at revival screenings of Oliver years later. I also remember a screening of the movie that I attended at the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences. It was a reunion of many of the Oliver actors and filmmakers, and it was quite a night. Oliver Reed was there, and he began doing what he liked to do in his later years, which was to try and shock his audience with his own account of, let's say, his involvement in this number and one of its dancers. Musical director John Green was also there, wheelchair-bound, but still stylish with a red carnation in his lapel. And when Oliver Reed finished talking, John Green sighed and said, "Oliver, you were a ham then and you're a ham now." And that brought the house down. Again, such brilliant character portraits in this number, all told through dance. And as this marching regiment approaches, I can share one other insight into how seriously Anna White took her work. For the choreography of the soldiers, White consulted with a sergeant major from the Scots Guards, and she learned the precise movements of the regiment, which she then incorporated into this section of the dance. Did you notice how John Green incorporated a little of the song "Consider Yourself" into this music? Between a musical phrase, we hear da-da-da-da. It's one of hundreds of ways that Green uses music to help unify this film, so that despite its various changes in tone, from drama to comedy to tragedy, Oliver the movie feels like a single, cohesive story. And on that triumphant note, here comes one of those tone changes, brilliantly executed without a word of dialogue. Notice the use of silence here after nearly 9 minutes of music. Carol Reed may not have directed a big musical before this, but he certainly understood rhythm and the need for contrast in a scene. It's the silence and the perfectly calibrated close-ups that make us feel, yes, like an explosion is coming.
Don't you back onto me, my girl.
3 days since I spotted him.
And what you done about it, eh?
In his autobiography, Jack Wilde remembered the filming of this scene vividly.
We got to get hold of him somehow. Lowe's coming.
Suppose it'll have to be me.
Shut.
3 days since I spotted him, and what have you done about it? Nothing, said Wilde. He threw the words out with such force, it seemed as though a single noun could have killed you stone dead.
My dear, what do you say?
It's no good you trying it on with me.
And just exactly what do you mean by that remark?
What I say, I'm not going.
Reed is also doing a Cockney accent for the character. As Jack Wilde said, I'd watch him change from this well-spoken actor to an East End villain, and I believed this change completely. I remember in one scene he grabbed Nancy around the neck. As his hand touched her throat, he grimaced as though her pain was his. It was so powerful. To me, it was perfect acting. Well, that moment is about to occur.
Think what would happen to us. Think what would happen to Bill. It would be the gallows.
When Shani Wallis was asked about Oliver Reed, she replied, he was a really tough guy, and he would just take the scene and do it. Everything we did together, we just did it. He was a tough guy. Well, we're about to see one of those raw moments of toughness that remind us what Bill Sikes is capable of. Again, the absence of music, the use of total silence, show the brilliance of Carol Reed as a director. Nothing could make us feel Nancy's pain and her injury more than the reaction of Fagin's boys who love her.
Even if I have to drag her there myself.
I mentioned earlier that some decision-makers on the movie had some reluctance at first about casting Shani Wallis, since her clean-cut look and her maternal warmth were so different from the way Dickens wrote Nancy and the way the character was usually played on stage and screen. Well, when this film opened in 1968, critical response to her performance was mixed, not because she wasn't talented, but because her Nancy was so different from what people had seen before. But that opinion became the minority because generations of moviegoers were introduced to the character of Nancy by Shani Wallis's performance. And as a result, as Oliver historian Mark Napolitano observed, her interpretation had a profound effect on the larger cultural perception of Dickens' character. Indeed, Wallis has significantly influenced the reputation of Nancy in several prominent adaptations produced in the wake of the Carol Reed film. And here is perhaps the score's most emotional song, As Long as He Needs Me, beautifully performed.
Needs me. Who else would love him still when they've been used so ill?
Shani Wallis had an interesting observation about this song. She said in 1968, Bill wants her to do something detrimental to Oliver, and she doesn't want to do it. And the song is really an excuse. She's excusing herself. She says, as long as he needs me, I'll do it.
So much when he is gone, but when he's near me, I don't let on. I feel inside.
This song never had a better arrangement than the one we hear now. It's one of many times that John Green's arrangements add, in the words of one stage producer, Wayne Bryan, texture, dissonance, and complexity to Bart's catchy but simple tunes. As Long as He Needs Me gains very dominant counter-melodies that reflect, for me, the complexity of relationships in which abused women choose to stay with their abusers. When Oliver premiered on stage and then appeared on screens, some critics complained that the story wasn't as gritty or grim as it was in the Dickens novel, to which I say, well, duh, because an Oliver musical that included all of the novel's cruelty and violence and, yes, the social prejudice of its author regarding Fagin, that musical would be, for me at least, unwatchable. And besides, director David Lean's 1948 film of Oliver Twist does capture that brutality with a harshness that is both brilliant and at times excruciating to watch. And just as we saw in that Sikes and Nancy scene, Oliver the Musical does not ignore the pain and social commentary in Dickens' novel, but it transforms it into something original, and in the characters of Fagin, Nancy, and Sikes, I think it adds more character dimension than the original book. And ultimately, there's no need to choose between the novel and the musical. I would prefer to enjoy them both.
Right or wrong, and somehow I'll be.
While Nancy sings about the man she loves, is a good time, I think, to complete the story of songwriter Lionel Bart, a man who related to that struggle to find love in the world. As I mentioned, Oliver was an enormous hit on stage and on screen, and Bart, who was already wealthy from his pop songwriting, grew even richer. But all that fame was too much for him. He began using drugs, his subsequent stage musicals were not as successful as Oliver, and in 1966 he broke the first rule of show business by putting his own money into his latest show. It was a musical about Robin Hood called Twang. Yes, there was an exclamation point in the title. Twang was hugely expensive and a disastrous flop. After that, Lionel Bart had to sign away all royalties for his work, including Oliver, to pay his debts, and he declared bankruptcy in 1972. But in a twist that Charles Dickens would have loved, an unexpected benefactor came to Bart's rescue years later. In 1994, Cameron Mackintosh, the producer of Les Miserables, The Phantom of the Opera, and many other blockbusters, put on a lavish stage revival of Oliver, the show he'd worked on as an assistant stage manager back in the 1960s. He assembled a fantastic team that included Sam Mendes as director, Matthew Bourne as choreographer, and he hired Lionel Bart to write additional music and lyrics, which meant that Bart was making money again. That revival at the London Palladium ran for 4 years. So the final act of Lionel Bart's life was much happier than what had come in the years before it. He died at the age of 68 in 1999.
Thank you. Please, sir, these books came for you.
Oh, good. Oh, wait, there's some to go back.
Boy's gone, sir.
We now get to see more of Mr. Brownlow's home, so let's talk about the man who plays him. The actor is Joseph O'Connor, who was born in Dublin, Ireland in 1910. He was a busy Shakespearean stage actor and occasionally made films like this one and later The Dark Crystal, which coincidentally was the final film of Oliver's cinematographer, Oswald Morris. Talking about this part of the story, Carol Reed once remarked, "I enjoyed bringing out the difference between Fagin's disreputable den and the charming crescent where Mr. Brownlow lives." The director then added, perhaps a bit tongue-in-cheek, that if I were a child, I would prefer the thieves' kitchen to that awful man and his pretty house. Well, behind that joking remark was a bit of seriousness. During much of his life, Carol Reed worried that he might someday settle down into a very domestic lifestyle, thinking he preferred the ability to move from place to place, which may be another reason he related to this story about a hero and a group of thieves who are always on the move. But actually, Reed did enjoy a very happy domestic life with his second wife, the actress Penelope Dudley Ward. She and Reed married in 1948 and stayed together until his death at age 69 in 1976. Every adaptation of Dickens' Oliver Twist has to contend with the details of who Oliver really is. In the book, his family backstory is much more complicated. He's not related to Mr. Brownlow. Agnes is not Mr. Brownlow's niece. Instead, Mr. Brownlow was a friend of Oliver's family, but more on that later. For now, I'll just say the filmmakers made an excellent choice in simplifying this part of the story. Oliver's convoluted family tree is not Dickens' finest hour as a writer. Well, just as in the novel, Oliver is about to be snatched from paradise and reclaimed by Fagin and Bill Sikes. In the original novel, Nancy hasn't shown much interest in Oliver by this point in the story. She goes along with the plan to abduct him and take him back to Fagin. It's only after that point in the book that Nancy starts to have moral qualms about what's going to happen to Oliver. And of course, making her a sympathetic character much earlier in the film makes us care about her more. The kidnapping sequence in the movie is staged superbly. In Dickens' book, Oliver is terrified when Nancy suddenly approaches him because she's a member of Fagin's gang to him. Oliver tries to pull away and screams for help, But as a crowd surrounds them, Nancy takes over and loudly exclaims that she is the boy's sister and that he ran away nearly a month ago from his parents, who are hard-working and respectable people, and he went and joined a set of thieves and almost broke his mother's heart. With that, the crowd turns against Oliver and forces him to leave with Nancy. It's a more jarring and nightmarish scene, and it's faithfully captured in the David Lean film. Here, Carol Reed takes a rather Hitchcockian approach. There's no dialogue, just the sounds of the street. And at first, Oliver is happy to see Nancy since she's been kind to him. It's only later that he realizes what is happening to him. It's the kind of suspense sequence Reed created so masterfully in movies like The Third Man. Well, now we come to 6 minutes of pure drama with much of the dialogue straight out of Dickens. So let's use this time to talk about the reaction to this movie when it was completed in the spring of 1968, nearly a year after shooting began. When Carol Reed showed his cut of Oliver to his producer, John Wolfe, Wolfe was said to be ecstatic. Unlike the original stage show, this was not a case where everyone feared that they had a turkey on their hands. On the contrary, Reed and Wolfe were confident that Oliver the movie would be an enormous hit. And when executives at Columbia Pictures saw the film, they agreed, and they unleashed a mammoth campaign of promotion. Oliver had its world premiere on September 26, 1968, at the Odeon Theatre, Leicester Square in London. It was a royal world premiere with Queen Elizabeth's sister, Princess Margaret, in attendance. Appropriately, the evening was a fundraiser for the National Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Children. All of the film stars were present, and Shani Wallis would fondly recall sitting next to Princess Margaret during the after-party, saying that the two of them talked all night. 16-year-old Jack Wilde was also at that royal premiere, and in his autobiography, he describes feeling overwhelmed by it all, especially when he met Princess Margaret, along with movie stars like Roger Moore. As he watched the movie for the first time, Wilde said that he noticed that in some scenes I was mouthing Rod Moody's dialogue back to him. Well, I've watched this film many times, and I've never noticed that before. But if you want a challenge, watch the Dodgers scenes and see if you can spot the very few times that Wilde's lips are moving during another actor's dialogue. Wilde was being modest. He is fantastic in the film, and it made him an overnight celebrity.
You take care I don't overdo it, Fagin, or I'll put the finger on all of you, and I don't care if I hang for it.
Oliver was first seen by the British public a day after that royal premiere on September 27, 1968, and it played on British movie screens for nearly 2 years. After its successful launch in the UK, Columbia held other celebrity-filled screenings across Europe, all of which were fundraisers for UNICEF, the United Nations International Children's Emergency Fund. In Paris, the premiere was attended by Princess Grace of Monaco, better known to us as Grace Kelly. In Rome, it was attended by Senator Montini, the brother of Pope Paul VI. So you couldn't have better publicity ahead of the movie's opening in America. Oliver had its U.S. premiere in New York City on December 11, 1968, ahead of a 14-city release that Christmas. In those days, movies didn't open at 600 theaters on the same day. They were gradually rolled out to build word of mouth. Before we talk about how Oliver was received in America, it's essential to take a bigger look at what was happening in the year it opened. 1968 would be one of the most violent and tragic years in modern American history. That April, Martin Luther King was assassinated. 2 months later, Senator Robert Kennedy was fatally shot. The escalation of the Vietnam War continued, and in August, 1 month before Oliver opened, the Democratic National Convention erupted in violence as police beat mostly unarmed anti-war protesters. It was a very dark time. So how did Oliver play amid all of that? Actually, it seemed the perfect movie for the moment, because it had darkness, yes, but it also had upbeat and already well-known tunes that the public loved. It had endearing characters, unforgettable villains. It had energy and life, and audiences loved it. It was a box office smash, earning more than $40 million in its original run, which would be about $300 million today. Even most film critics raved about it, singling out Ron Moody and Jack Wilde as favorites among the cast. One of the reviews that Ron Moody appreciated most came from Oliver's creator, Lionel Bart. You may recall that Bart had not wanted Moody to be cast as Fagin. They had had a falling out during the stage production. But after seeing the finished film, Bart said that he considered Ron Moody's performance the highlight of the movie, which, after several years of tension between the two men, made Moody, well, happy. Oliver's soundtrack was a best-selling album. There were souvenir program books, jigsaw puzzles, a novelization, coloring books, dolls, even an Oliver hat. And for the British film industry, Oliver made history. Before this film, Britain had never made a movie musical that became an international hit. Oliver made that happen, which is why Sir Andrew Lloyd Webber has called Lionel Bart the father of the modern British musical. In 1969, the film was nominated for 11 Academy Awards. It won 5 for sound mixing, Best Music Original or Adaptation for John Green, Best Art Direction, John Box, Best Director, Carol Reed, and Best Picture of 1968. As I mentioned earlier, it also received a 6th special Oscar for Anna White for her outstanding choreography achievement. And here's some trivia you can use with friends. Oliver is the only G-rated movie to date to win Best Picture, and it's the only Best Picture winner with an exclamation point in its title. I mentioned earlier that Ron Moody lost the Best Actor trophy to Cliff Robertson in Charlie. Well, Jack Wilde was nominated for Best Supporting Actor, and when he heard the presenter say the word Jack, he stood up. Then he quickly sat down again when the presenter finished the name of Jack Albertson, who had won for the drama The Subject Was Roses. In his autobiography, Jack Wilde recalled a touching gesture from Carol Reed that evening at the after-party. Wilde wrote that the director placed a fatherly hand on my shoulder, smiled, and squeezed my shoulder. Without you two, Moody and Wilde, none of us would have won, he said.
Look after him, Dodger. And I'll look after myself. Man's got a heart.
Well, now we come to the song that provides Fagin's greatest character scene and gave Ron Moody a musical soliloquy that he would perform pretty much for the rest of his life on various occasions. Audiences loved this song, and so did Moody. He later said, "My proudest moment was the number Reviewing the Situation. I asked them to film it on the steps, and I'd dance first slowly up, then swiftly back down them, torn between the safety of the kitchen and the dangers of the world outside."
All his life, all the trials and tribulation. Better settle down and get myself a wife. And the wife would cook and sew for me and come for me and go for me and go for me and nag at me. The finger she would wag at me, the money she would take from me, a misery she'd make from me.
This is perhaps the quintessential example of how Lionel Bart took the Jewishness of Fagin and, rather than use it pejoratively as Dickens had done, consciously or not, Bart celebrates the Jewishness of Fagin with this song. There are passages in it that sound like they could be sung by a cantor, and other parts that sound straight out of the Yiddish theater, a simple yet ingenious combination of musical styles.
And to influence people.
So how?
I'm reviewing the situation. I must quickly look up everyone I know.
This is also a great character-defining song, one that makes us sympathize more with Fagin, because who doesn't wonder about making plans for the future or worry about how unpredictable the future is? All that while making us laugh and tap our feet.
Befitting of my new estate. Good morrow to you, magistrate.
Needless to say, Dickens' Fagin never questions his criminal path. He's fully committed to a life of crime until, in the book, he is captured, imprisoned, and sentenced to hang. That's a scenario we're teased with earlier in this song when Fagin passes that rope. But as we'll see, Lionel Bart and Carol Reed give Fagin a different fate in this version of the story, one that I think is fitting for their take on the character. We'll talk more about that later.
I'm reviewing the situation. If you want to eat, you've got to earn a bob.
Before this song is over, I should acknowledge some of the other actors who've taken on this role and played it in very different ways. In the silent era, Lon Chaney, the so-called Man of 1,000 Faces, played Fagin opposite Jackie Coogan in the 1922 film version. In David Lean's acclaimed 1948 movie, Alec Guinness gave a powerful but highly controversial portrayal of the character, controversial because it stuck so closely to the way that Dickens wrote Fagin and the way Fagin looked in the original drawings by Dickens' artist George Cruikshank. Fagin was later portrayed in TV movies by George C. Scott and Richard Dreyfuss. Ben Kingsley played him in a 2005 film version, and on stage during the 1990s and 2000s, London theatergoers saw Jonathan Pryce, Robert Lindsay, and Rowan Atkinson take on the role. But as fine as many of those performances have been, none can erase the indelible memory of Ron Moody in this film.
The situation, I'm a bad 'un, and the bad 'un I shall stay. You'll be seeing no transformation, but it's wrong to be a rogue in every way. I don't want nobody hurt for me or made to do the dirt for me. This rotten life is not for me, it's getting far too hot for me. There is no in-between for me, but who will change the scene for me? Don't want no one to rob for me, but who will find a job for me? I think I'd better think it out again.
And so, sir, the instant I received your communication regarding dear little Oliver, I decided we must take the first coach to London.
I decided.
Yeah, that's right, so my dear wife.
It was good of you to come. Now, what have you got to tell me?
And now, compared to Dickens' novel, Oliver's story begins to move at rocket speed. We're only halfway through the novel by this point, but in the film, an enormous amount of Dickens' plot is simplified and compressed into this one tight scene.
You've kept this all these years.
In the book, Mr. Bumble and his wife are deeply involved in a criminal cover-up of Oliver's true identity. They were bribed by Oliver's older half-brother, a mysterious man called Mr. Monks, to help hide evidence that Oliver's father had a fortune and meant to give it to his illegitimate son, Oliver, not to Mr. Monks. In the novel, the Bumbles are severely punished for their role in this scheme by having their jobs taken away from them, destroying their position in society and their pride. That's something this film at least suggests with some dialogue. And the scene ends with one of the most famous quotes from Dickens' novel, spoken with characteristic energy and comic flair by Harry Seacombe.
I knew nothing of it until yesterday.
That's no excuse. In the eyes of the law, you are the more guilty of the two. For the law supposes that your wife acts under your direction.
If that's what the law supposes, sir, then the law's a hass. If that's the eye of the law, sir, then the law's a bachelor. And the worst I wish the law is that his eye may be opened by experience. By experience, sir.
Sir, the locket.
In the 2005 movie of Oliver Twist, the one with Ben Kingsley as Fagin, the filmmakers made an interesting choice. Oliver isn't related to any of the other characters in the story. He's just a little boy who needs rescuing. That surprised me when I first saw the film, but I've come to like that choice. It does change Dickens' original, but it's true to the author in the sense that Charles Dickens passionately believed that every child, rich or poor, needed food and safety and love. For the film, Carol Reed and his team restore a major section of Dickens' book that was not part of Lionel Bart's stage musical, that being Bill Sikes taking Oliver with him for a dangerous house burglary. Restoring this plot point adds an important element of suspense as we near the end of the story. It gives us another opportunity to see Nancy stand up to Bill Sikes in this scene, which, like most of the dramatic scenes in the movie, has no underscoring, adding to its feel of realism. And it also helps us understand why Nancy feels it is imperative to get Oliver away from Bill and Fagin.
And on this particular job, that's what counts.
Must I go?
In the book, Bill Sikes is a shouter, but Oliver Reed doesn't need to raise his voice to send a chill down our spines. And this moment with the gun isn't just frightening, it gives us yet another reminder of how capable Sikes is of impulsive violence, even toward the woman who loves him.
Can't! I won't let
We'll have no more of that.
Listen to the way John Green scores this wordless passage of Nancy making up her mind. Green combines the song It's a Fine Life, which Nancy now realizes it isn't, along with Oliver's song Where is Love, and Nancy's ballad As Long as He Needs Me. It's as if there's a war in her mind between Oliver's need for love and safety and her own love for Bill. Of course, Nancy's moral compass will finally turn to what is best for Oliver. The scene you're about to see was one of Shani Wallace's favorites to film. She loved performing this exchange with Mr. Brownlow, in which Nancy tries to ensure Oliver's safety while at the same time recognizing that it may cost her her life. But before that exchange, Shani Wallace interacts here with another of British cinema's great character actresses. Mr. Brownlow's loyal servant, Mrs. Bedwin, is played by Meggs Jenkins, a familiar face on movie screens since the 1940s. On stage, she performed in everything from Chekhov to Tennessee Williams. But she may be best known to movie fans for her performances in two classic British films, the mystery drama Green for Danger and the supernatural thriller The Innocents, starring Deborah Kerr. They are both terrific films, and I hope you'll seek them out.
Here is too far.
Where then?
The bridge. London Bridge, tonight at midnight. But you've got to come alone. Promise you'll come on your own.
In the book, Nancy is pretty much resigned to dying. She's a much more beaten down, cynical character, and she knows she's going to come to a bad end. One thing I love about Shani Wallace's performance is that she is aware something terrible may happen to her, even something fatal, but you never get a sense that she's given up hope that things might work out for everyone.
Whatever else I do, I won't turn on him. You wouldn't understand. I've got to go back. I want to go back. Promise you'll come?
That's 12 o'clock.
This house burglary, as I mentioned, comes from Dickens' novel, but the filmmakers are about to make a gigantic change in how this sequence ends compared with the book. And I wish I could thank Carol Reed personally for doing so, because it is, I will say it, a huge improvement on the writing of Charles Dickens. A reminder that Oliver Twist was only Dickens' second novel. He was 25 years old when he wrote it, so it's remarkable how much of the book is successful. His witty but scathing indictment of workhouses, his depiction of the criminal underworld, these and other portions of the book are absolute genius. But Dickens also had a weakness for sentimentality, and to be fair, his willingness to write virtuous characters who were too good to be true and who spoke in long declamatory paragraphs, that was very much a style that readers of his day enjoyed. In the novel, when this burglary goes wrong, Oliver does not escape from the household. He is shot and wounded by one of the servants. And when that household discovers that Oliver is a child, he is taken in and cared for. Well, who should be living in that home but a beautiful girl of 17 named Rose Maylie, a girl who will not marry her sweetheart, her noble cousin Harry, because no one knows who her parents were. Well, many chapters later, we learn that the evil Mr. Monks, remember that's Oliver's half-brother in the novel, Mr. Monks was also responsible for taking Rose away from her family when she was a child. And who does Rose turn out to be but Oliver's aunt? That's right, the young girl living in this house and Oliver are related. And now that she knows who she is, Rose can marry her adoring cousin Harry. Well, if this all sounds like a bad Victorian melodrama, it's because it is. And unless you're watching a very long and complete adaptation of Oliver Twist, maybe on television, the Rose and Harry subplot is almost always cut out, and I have yet to meet anyone who misses it. For the rest of the novel, Oliver is kept safe in this home and far away from Fagin and Sykes, so he basically disappears from his own story for many chapters. But in Oliver the movie, like the 1948 David Lean film, Oliver remains a hostage of the criminals, which is a much better dramatic choice, since it allows him to be present during the rest of the very dramatic events that end the story.
Seize it! Seize it! Seize it, good dogs!
And no, I haven't forgotten about Bullseye, Bill Sykes' dog. His real name was Butch, and he belonged to Cindy Charville of the company Animals Galore, which, according to a 2011 newspaper article, for decades scouted, cast, and trained four-legged show stealers for stage and screen. So Butch the English Bull Terrier actually had a comfortable life, you could even say a fine life, unlike his movie counterpart, Bullseye.
Why worry, my dear? He always turns up. Maybe he has taken Oliver back to my place.
He said he was coming straight here.
Then that is what he will do.
And now we come to one of the most thrilling sequences in this movie, a sequence that we have Carol Reed to thank for, with his insistence on making sure that every song served a dramatic purpose. As theater producer Wayne Bryan once wrote, the film's most brilliant reinvention is Papa, turning it into a thrilling and suspenseful climax to the drama when Nancy uses this cheerful music hall ditty as a desperate ploy to get Oliver spirited away to Mr. Brownlow before the stroke of midnight. I remember I could almost not breathe the first time I saw the film. It was so brilliant in conception and execution on every level. So yes, on stage, Papa is a fun, rousing tune that exists purely to entertain. It's the kind of sing-along tune that audiences knew and loved from English music halls. But here it becomes a tool for Nancy, who has run out of options to help Oliver escape until she uses the song as a brilliant decoy.
Papa, that's how it goes. Papa, everyone knows. They all suppose what they want to suppose when they hear Papa, that's how it goes. Papa, everyone knows. They all suppose.
When asked about its filming, Shaney Wallace later said, Sir Carol Reed wanted it to be very dramatic. He was the one, I think, that suggested the whole scene where she's looking and trying to get the boy out and looking at the dog and at the clock. He built up this great drama, and I think that that's what he did for the movie. He made it great.
Your own imaginations will tell you just exactly what you want to hear. Papa, that's how it goes. Papa, everyone knows. They all suppose what they want to suppose when they hear Papa.
Events are going to unfold swiftly after this song. So while Nancy and company sing, I'm going to move ahead in the story and talk about what comes after it. Nancy's murder at the hand of Sykes. It's probably the most tragic and disturbing scene in any family-friendly musical. But horrible as it is much less graphic than the way it occurs in the novel. Real-life murders had fascinated Dickens from his earliest days as a reporter. There are murder scenes in many of Dickens' stories. Even Little Dorrit has a serial killer, believe it or not. The mostly comic novel, Martin Chuzzlewit, has a very suspenseful stalking sequence that Hitchcock could have filmed, and a key plot point in Bleak House is the mysterious murder of a lawyer who's blackmailing one of the main characters. The build-ups to these murders are usually written in incredibly suspenseful prose. You know something terrible is about to happen, but you can't stop reading. His very last novel, The Mystery of Edwin Drood, was going to be Dickens' first full-fledged mystery novel, a book in which whodunit was the central question of the plot, and the mystery would be solved at the end. Unfortunately, Dickens died of a stroke in 1870 halfway through writing that book. He was 58 years old, so we'll never know for sure why its title character, Edwin Drood, disappeared, although many other writers have jumped in with their own ideas and attempted to complete the book. Well, sadly, there's no question what happens to Nancy and Oliver. She gives her life for a little boy that she has come to love. In the book, Sikes kills Nancy, but most of the events leading up to that are very different from this film. In the book, Nancy arranges a secret meeting with Mr. Brownlow by the river. In the days that follow, Fagin, who, remember, is pure evil in the book, notices that Nancy is acting strangely, so he decides to have her followed by the newest member of his criminal organization, and that is none other than Noah Claypole, the slow-witted employee of Mr. Sowerberry, the coffin maker, who we saw earlier in the story, the one who insults the memory of Oliver's mother and gets in a fight with him. Well, hundreds of pages later in the book, Noah Claypole and his girlfriend Charlotte turn up in London, and Noah joins Fagin's gang. At Fagin's instruction, Noah follows Nancy to her meeting with Mr. Brownlow, and as she does in the movie, Nancy says nothing that will harm Bill or Fagin. Noah Claypole goes back to Fagin and gives a muddled version of what he heard. Fagin tells Bill Sikes that Nancy has peached or informed on them all, and Bill goes to his rooms to confront Nancy. What follows is the most brutal chapter in the entire Dickens canon. I'll just say that if the murder was filmed the way Dickens wrote it, the movie would be rated R, if not NC-17. Bill Sikes becomes an animal, and after the deed is done, he spends the night and the next day staring at Nancy's body, trying to get her expression out of his mind. Well, despite the graphic nature of these chapters, Dickens chose to read them during the wildly popular speaking engagements he gave starting in 1865, 5 years before he passed away. Some of his friends advised him not to read these chapters, but Dickens knew that audiences would be spellbound by them, and he was right. One critic of the day wrote that when he heard Dickens perform The Death of Nancy, he felt an irresistible desire to scream during it. But audiences were captivated, and Dickens would perform that section of the book 28 times during the last 14 months of his life. According to his biographer, Claire Tomalin, he would shout and sob and exhaust himself completely. His pulse rate would go up from 72 to as high as 112 by the time a reading was done. As for how Nancy's death was rehearsed and shot for this movie, Shaney Wallace later said, "It was pretty much improvised. There was very little preconceived direction. Oliver Reed was great at that." Oliver Reed. Boy, was he tough. He said, "Do what you want to me. I'll be able to defend myself, and I will do the rest." And he was a great motivator. When he grabbed me, I didn't expect it, and that scene just happened. He never actually hurt me, but it was very frightening. Did you notice what song was used just then in the underscoring? It's Nancy's ballad about Bill, As Long as He Needs Me. And I think that music and Oliver Reed's expression here were an attempt within the movie's time constraints to convey some of that chilling section of Dickens' book when Sikes realizes what he's done, but he cannot accept it.
Bullseye! Bullseye, come here!
You come here, Bullseye.
This is always a stressful part of the movie for any dog lover, even though if we've seen it, we know that Bullseye is going to come out of it okay. I wish I could say the same about Bullseye in the novel. In the book, the dog does run away and alerts others that Bill Sikes, now a wanted murderer, is in the neighborhood. Unfortunately, when Sikes falls from the top of a building in the book, more on that in a moment, we are told that moments later, a dog, which had lain concealed until now, ran backwards and forwards on the parapet with a dismal howl, and collecting himself for a spring, jumped for the dead man's soldiers, missing his aim. Well, I'll just stop there and say that Dickens seems to suggest that Bill and Bullseye were inseparable to the end. Thankfully, this movie makes a happier choice. And in my imagination, at the end of this film, Bullseye gets the reward money for Bill's death, and then he's adopted by Charlie Bates, the one member of Fagin's gang who gives up crime in the book.
Some brass. I've got to get away.
What's wrong, Bill?
Do you want to say I want brass, money?
There's blood on your coat. Where's Nancy?
As Sikes and Fagin have their heated exchange, let's bring Oliver Reed's story full circle. His performance in Oliver delivered on the promise that he had shown in previous years, and overnight he became a movie star. He made many fine films after Oliver, from Ken Russell's Women in Love and The Devils to 1999's Best Picture winner, Gladiator. It's widely known that Oliver Reed was quite a carouser. He did not take care of himself, and unfortunately, he died midway through the filming of Gladiator at the age of 61. That film was dedicated to him.
How much? 10? 20? Not all of it.
And if the law should come here, asking for me,
they won't find me here. You don't think I'm going to stand here and wait for them, do you?
It's him. Bullseye.
And since we have time, here are some other last thoughts on cast members. Mark Lester never expected acting to be his lifelong career, and after co-starring in the adventure tale Crossed Swords in 1977 and co-starring Oliver Reed, Mark changed careers. As of 2021, he's an osteopath and acupuncturist living in Cheltenham, a beautiful part of England.
Bill! Why make things worse? Leave him!
It's me they're after! But they won't go for me. Not what a boy can say won't. So you keep at it.
Out the back way, come on!
On the heels of Oliver's success, Jack Wilde went on to star in the popular Saturday morning series H.R. Pufnstuf. And while he did unfortunately have several bad years dealing with drugs and alcohol problems, his story ended on a happy note. He recovered. He was sober the last 16 years of his life. He did some acting in films like the Kevin Costner Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves, and he found a devoted companion in his wife, Claire Harding. Jack Wilde passed away from cancer in 2006. By coincidence, about a year ago, I became friends with his widow, Claire. She's a wonderful champion of Jack's life and career, and thanks to her efforts, you can read his moving autobiography, It's a Dodger's Life. Thank you, Claire. As for Shani Wallace, after making Oliver, she lived in America with her husband and manager, Bernie Rich. Like Ron Moody, she said that she turned down a lot of job offers after Oliver because they weren't as good, and she wanted to make more movie musicals. Unfortunately, fewer and fewer musicals were being produced, so she focused her career on nightclub performances, and she did a lot of theater, including a co-starring role in the London West End production of 42nd Street. As of this commentary, Shani Wallis is an 88-year-old grandmother living in California, and she remains very proud of being part of Oliver. I love the ironic use of the song Who Will Buy here in the underscore. Of course, that's the song of the street vendors sung cheerfully at the beginning of Part 2. But here, I think, Who Will Buy is being used in a sardonic, rather Dickensian way, since it is Bill Sykes' life that is up for sale, with reward money going to whoever brings him down. Well, as mentioned earlier, at this point in the novel, Oliver is safely ensconced with his protectors in London. Bill Sykes is on his own, hunted by a growing mob and unable to block out the image of Nancy's lifeless eyes. In the book, as here, he is finally surrounded by a mob on a rooftop. But his demise happens a bit differently in the novel. Sykes tries to lower himself down on a rope, but as Dickens writes, at the very instant when he brought the loop over his head, previous to slipping it beneath his armpits, the murderer, looking behind him on the roof, threw his arms above his head and uttered a yell of terror. "The eyes again," he cried in an unearthly screech. Staggering as if struck by lightning, he lost his balance and tumbled over the parapet. The noose was on his neck. He fell for 35 feet. There was a sudden jerk, a terrific convulsion of the limbs, and there he hung, with the open knife clenched in his stiffening hand. Well, that's effective melodrama, and it certainly has some sharp details that reveal Dickens' skill as a reporter. But again, I think the movie handles Bill Sykes' death more credibly. The music that follows is far and away the most dramatic underscoring in the film. It makes skillful use of Bill's theme, the song My Name. Let's listen and watch, and I will be back with you after Sykes is taken care of. Again, great use of silence and simple sounds. A dog's howl, a creaking rope. So what happens to the Artful Dodger and Fagin? Well, it depends on which version of Oliver Twist you're talking about. As I mentioned in the book, Fagin is hanged after days of stunned disbelief that he has finally been captured. In the stage musical Oliver, Fagin has this wistful reprise of reviewing the situation. He sings the lines, "I'll turn a new leaf over, and who shall know what I may find?" Then he trudges into the sunset as the curtain falls, quite possibly a reformed man. As for the Dodger, in the book and the stage musical, he is arrested, but he exits with a few cocky lines of defiance. You definitely get the sense that Dickens had a soft spot for him. Well, for the movie, Lionel Bart and Carol Reed worked together to find a satisfying and more cinematic ending for Fagin and the Dodger. And one day, Bart sent Carol Reed a short outline that said, in part, "Fagin left alone. Short reprise of reviewing the situation. Dodger approaches. Fagin and Dodger pal up. Reprise as duet, reviewing the situation." And that's the ending they chose. Ron Moody was a great admirer of Carol Reed's film The Third Man, a thriller filled with wet cobblestones. When it came time to film this last scene in Oliver, Moody said, "The props were going around with buckets, dashing the water all over the cobblestones, and I said, that's it, Carol Reed is back again." Well, Carol Reed was indeed back as a director with Oliver. For him and other veteran members of the team, this film would be their crowning achievement after decades of outstanding work. For its stars, who were mostly fresh faces on the screen, it would be a career high point. And even if it proved untoppable, it created lifelong bonds of friendship between the actors. After Oliver, other Dickens books were musicalized for the stage and screen. My favorite of these is 1970's Scrooge, also photographed by Oswald Morris and starring Albert Finney in the title role. But none of the shows or movies that followed could match the critical and financial bullseye that was Oliver.
For your talent is employable, so make your life enjoyable. A world with pockets open wide awake.
Why did it succeed? Well, I'll leave that to an expert, author Ken Bloom, who wrote, "The enduring legacy of Oliver is the way it touches viewers' emotions with intimacies and small details of acting and production that stand out amid the spectacle. It is that specificity, as well as the movie's heart, that makes it great." I recommend Mr. Bloom's book that comes from. It's called Hollywood Musicals. And another writer I've mentioned is Mark Napolitano. He's author of a fascinating history of this show called Oliver, a Dickensian musical. And I'll give him the last word on this show. Napolitano writes, "If Where is Love is indeed the central unifying thread to Oliver, then the title question has already been answered in the public's love for this treasure of the musical stage." And to that I would only add this treasure of a movie musical. Well, thank you so much for listening. My name is Stephen C. Smith, and as Fagin might say, good night, my dears.